The fire had already started when Adeline Carter made her choice, not to run, but to fight. Flames tore through the barn like hungry demons, and somewhere in that inferno, the man who'd given her a second chance was still inside. The town had called her a scandal. They'd whispered she didn't belong. But tonight, with embers raining down like hellfire and the entire valley watching, Adeline would show them exactly what a widow from nowhere was made of. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand how a stranger became the heart of Mercer Ridge Ranch and why she'd risk everything to save it, we need to go back 3 months, to the day she arrived in Red Hollow with nothing but a carpet bag and a newspaper clipping that promised one last chance at survival. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The arrival. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in a cloud of dust so thick Adeline Carter couldn't see the town through the window, only the hazy outline of wooden buildings baking under a merciless August sun. She pressed one gloved hand against the worn leather seat to steady herself as the driver's boots hit the ground outside. "Red Hollow," he shouted, his voice rough as gravel. "End of the line, ma'am." Adeline took a slow breath, tasting dust and distance. 3 days on this rattling torture device had left her bones aching and her dress, the only decent one she owned, wrinkled beyond recognition. But she wouldn't let it show, couldn't afford to. She gathered her carpet bag, the newspaper clipping still folded in her pocket like a talisman, and stepped down into the street. The heat hit her first, then the stairs. Red Hollow was smaller than she'd imagined, a single dirt road lined with sun-bleached buildings that seemed to lean into each other for support. The general store, a saloon with bat-wing doors hanging crooked on their hinges, a bank that looked more like a shed, and everywhere, men, cowhands leaning against hitching posts, their eyes tracking her like wolves watching a deer that had wandered into the wrong clearing. Adeline lifted her chin and started walking. She'd known it would be like this. A woman alone in a frontier town, heading to a ranch where 20 men lived and worked without a single woman in sight. Of course, there would be talk. There had been talk back in St. Louis, too, after Thomas died, and the creditors came for everything. Talk didn't break bones, it didn't empty your stomach or put you on the street. Talk she'd learned was just noise. "Well, well," the voice came from her left. "What do we have here?" 3 men stood outside the saloon, whiskey glasses in hand despite the early hour. The one who'd spoken was tall and thin, with a mustache that drooped past his chin and eyes that crawled over her like insects. Adeline didn't slow down. "Hey, lady." He pushed off from the post and took a step into her path. "I'm talking to you." She stopped, not because she wanted to, but because going around him would look like retreat, and she'd learned long ago that retreat only made predators bolder. "I'm looking for the general store," she said, her voice level. "Perhaps you could point me in the right direction and then return to your drinking." The man's companions laughed, ugly sounds that made her skin crawl. "Store's right there, sweetheart, but I'm more interested in where you're headed after." He stepped closer, and she caught the sour smell of yesterday's whiskey sweating through his pores. "Heard tell there was a woman coming to cook out at Mercer Ridge. That you?" "My business is my own." "See, I don't think so." His grin widened. "You're fixin' to head out to a ranch full of lonely men. That makes you everybody's business, especially when you look like—" "That's enough, Clem." The new voice cut through the air like a blade, quiet, but with an edge that made the drunk cowhand's mouth snap shut. Adeline turned. A man stood in the doorway of the general store, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair going gray at the temples and eyes the color of a winter sky. He wore range clothes, dusty jeans, a worn cotton shirt, boots that had seen 1,000 miles, but he carried himself with a stillness that commanded attention without demanding it. "Mr. Mercer," Clem said, and something in his voice had changed. The mockery was gone, replaced by wariness. "Didn't see you there." "Clearly." The man, Mercer, stepped down from the store's porch. He didn't look at Clem. His eyes were on Adeline, taking her measure with a directness that should have felt invasive, but somehow didn't. "You're Mrs. Carter?" She nodded, not trusting her voice yet. This was him, Cole Mercer, the man who'd placed the advertisement in the St. Louis newspaper. Cook wanted, hard work, fair wage. Respectable only. She'd answered from a boarding house room so small she could touch both walls at once, writing by candlelight because the landlady had shut off the gas to her floor. Respectable widow seeks honest work. Experienced cook, hard worker, no family to follow. That last part had been the hardest to write. No family to follow. As if Thomas and their stillborn daughter were just inconvenient complications rather than the entire world she'd lost. "I am," she said. Cole Mercer nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin. Then he turned to Clem with a look that could freeze fire. "You have somewhere else to be." It wasn't a question. Clem's jaw tightened, but he took a step back. His companions were already melting away, suddenly very interested in the dusty street. "Sure thing, Mr. Mercer. Was just being friendly." "Go be friendly somewhere else." Clem went. The silence that followed felt massive. Adeline became aware of the entire town watching them, faces in windows, men pausing their work, even a woman sweeping a porch across the street who'd stopped mid-stroke to stare. The weight of their judgment pressed down like a physical thing. Cole Mercer seemed not to notice. Or maybe he just didn't care. "Your telegram said you'd arrive today," he said, turning back to her. "I have supplies to collect. If you can wait 15 minutes, we'll head out to the ranch together." "Of course." Adeline kept her voice steady, professional. "Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Mercer." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "It's a 2-hour ride. There's a cafe down the street if you want to get something to eat first." "I'm fine, thank you." She wasn't fine. She was starving. But the cafe meant more stares, more whispers, and she'd spent the last of her money on the stagecoach ticket. Pride wouldn't feed her, but it would keep her spine straight. Mercer studied her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable sensation of being read like an open book. Then he nodded toward a bench outside the store. "Wait here. I'll be quick." He disappeared inside, and Adeline sank onto the bench before her trembling knees could betray her. Around her, Red Hollow returned to its business, but the whispers continued, a low buzz she couldn't make out, but could feel in her bones. Widow woman. Heading to Mercer Ridge. Wonder how long she'll last. 20 men and 1 woman. Ain't proper. Heard she's got no people. Desperate, probably. Let them talk. She'd survived worse than gossip. She'd buried a husband at 23, lost a baby who never drew breath, watched creditors strip her home bare, and auction off her wedding ring to pay Thomas's gambling debts, debts she hadn't known existed until he was cold in the ground. She'd stood in a charity line for bread, slept in a boarding house where the walls were so thin she could hear every sound of the city's ugliness, sewed until her fingers bled, taking in piecework that paid pennies and destroyed her eyes in the lamplight. And when she'd finally saved enough for a ticket west and seen Mercer's advertisement, she'd taken the chance without hesitation. Because staying in St. Louis meant dying slowly, and Adeline Carter had decided she was done with dying. The store door opened. Cole Mercer emerged carrying a crate of supplies, which he loaded onto a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. He moved with the efficiency of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. No wasted motion, no unnecessary conversation. When he finished, he held out his hand. "I can take your bag." Adeline hesitated. Everything she owned was in that carpet bag. 2 dresses, a nightgown, Thomas's pocket watch that she'd hidden from the creditors, and a book of poems her mother had given her before the fever took her. Trusting it to a stranger felt like trusting him with her entire life. But that's exactly what she was doing, wasn't it? She handed it over. Mercer placed it carefully in the wagon bed, then offered his hand again, this time to help her up onto the bench seat. His palm was calloused, rough, warm, strong. When she was settled, he climbed up beside her and took the reins. "It's a rough road," he said. "Hold on to the rail." Then he clicked his tongue, and the horses started moving. Red Hollow fell away behind them, and with it, the stares and whispers. The road stretched ahead, rutted dirt cutting through an ocean of prairie grass that rolled and swayed in waves under the endless sky. The heat was staggering, the sun a white hammer beating down on the land, but there was a kind of raw beauty to it that made Adeline's chest ache. She'd never seen so much space. In St. Louis, buildings pressed close and streets teemed with people and noise. Here, the horizon seemed to go on forever, and the silence was broken only by the creak of wagon wheels, the jingle of harnesses, and the whisper of wind through grass. "First time out west?" Mercer asked, his eyes on the road. "Yes." "It's different." "Yes." A pause, then, "The advertisement mentioned your husband passed." Adeline's hands tightened in her lap. 2 years ago. "I'm sorry." The words were simple, but something in his tone made them feel genuine rather than obligatory. She glanced at him, really looked at him for the first time. He was older than she'd expected, maybe 40, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun. There was a hardness to him, a weathered quality, but his mouth wasn't cruel, just careful, like he'd learned to guard his words the way some men guarded their money. "Thank you," she said quietly. "The advertisement also mentioned you needed a cook." "I do. The men have been taking turns at it, and half of them can't boil water without burning it. Morale's suffering." "How many men?" 20, including the foreman and me. We run cattle, some horses. It's hard work, long days." He paused. "The men are rough, but they're good. I don't tolerate disrespect or impropriety. You'll have your own quarters, a small cabin near the main house. Lock on the door. Any man steps out of line, you come to me." Adeline nodded, something in her chest loosening slightly. "What happened to your last cook?" "He retired, went to live with his daughter in California. Good man, but 70 years old and tired." Mercer's jaw tightened. "Some of the men wanted to hire from town. I said no." "Why?" He glanced at her, and for the first time she saw something that might have been respect in his eyes. "Because the women in Red Hollow would rather gossip than work. You wrote in your letter that you needed the job. That tells me you'll do it right." But the observation was so blunt it startled her into honesty. "I need the job very much, Mr. Mercer." "Then we'll both get what we need. You cook 3 meals a day, keep the kitchen clean, and help with basic ranch doctoring when necessary. Stitching cuts, wrapping sprains, that sort of thing. In return, you get wages, room, board, and respect." He turned back to the road. "I don't care what Red Hollow thinks. You work hard. You're safe at Mercer Ridge. That's my word." Adeline felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Hope. She tried to crush it. Hope had led her astray before, whispering that Thomas would change, that the baby would live, that everything would be all right. But sitting beside this quiet, stern man as the wagon rolled through an ocean of grass, she couldn't quite kill it. The landscape began to change. The flat prairie gave way to rolling hills, and in the distance she could see mountains rising like gray teeth against the sky. A creek appeared alongside the road, its water glinting in the sunlight, and cottonwood trees cast blessed shade across their path. "That's Willow Creek," Mercer said. "It runs through the ranch. Good water, year-round. That's what keeps us going when other spreads dry up." Adeline listened, filing away details. Water meant life out here. Water meant power. "Do you have neighbors?" "A few spreads within a day's ride. Most keep to themselves. We help each other during roundup, share resources when times are hard." His expression darkened. "Though that's been changing lately." "How so?" Mercer was quiet for a long moment, and Adeline thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "There's a man named Victor Langford. Bought up land east of here about 5 years ago. Rich, connected. He's been expanding, buying out smaller ranchers, sometimes pressuring them to sell when they don't want to." "And you?" "I won't sell." The words were flat, final. "This land has been in my family for 30 years. My father built the ranch from nothing, and I'll be damned before I let some Eastern money man take it." There was steel in his voice now, and Adeline understood that she was hearing something important, a line Cole Mercer would not cross, no matter the cost. "Has he approached you?" "Twice. The second time I made it clear he wasn't welcome. He hasn't been back, but—" Mercer's hands tightened on the reins. "Men like Langford don't give up. They just change tactics." A chill ran down Adeline's spine despite the heat. She wanted to ask more, but something in Mercer's expression told her the conversation was over. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon rocking gently over the rutted road. Then she saw it. The ranch emerged from behind a line of hills like something out of a dream, or maybe a hard-won reality. The main house was solid, built from logs and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Beside it stood a barn, massive and red, with a corral full of horses. Outbuildings dotted the landscape: bunkhouse, smokehouse, storage sheds. And everywhere, the land rolled out in waves of grass and possibility. "This is Mercer Ridge," Cole said, and there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before. Pride. Love. The bone-deep connection of a man to the earth he'd bled for. Adeline's throat tightened. It was beautiful, raw and rough, yes, but real in a way nothing in St. Louis had ever been. As they approached, men emerged from various buildings, cowhands in dusty clothes, their faces weathered and curious. They gathered near the barn, watching the wagon with the kind of interest that made Adeline's stomach flip. Here it was, the moment of truth. Mercer brought the wagon to a stop in front of the main house and set the brake. Before he could move, a man stepped forward from the group, older, maybe 50, with gray hair and a face like tanned leather. He wore a foreman's authority in his bearing, and his eyes swept over Adeline with an assessment that felt less invasive than resigned. "So you actually went through with it," the man said. "Grant, this is Mrs. Carter. She'll be cooking for us starting tomorrow." Mercer climbed down from the wagon, then turned to help Adeline. "Mrs. Carter, this is Grant Holloway. He runs the day-to-day operations." Grant nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Ma'am." "Mr. Holloway." "The cabin ready?" Mercer asked. "Cleaned it yesterday, put fresh linens on the bed, fixed the window latch." Grant's eyes flicked back to Adeline. "It's small, but it's private. And it's got a good lock, like you asked. Show her while I unload." Grant gestured toward a small building set slightly apart from the others, a cabin made of the same logs as the main house, with a stone chimney and a single window flanked by shutters. As they walked, Adeline felt 20 pairs of eyes tracking their every step. "They mean no harm," Grant said quietly. "Just curious. We haven't had a woman on this ranch in, well, ever, actually. Boss's mother died before I signed on, and he's never married." "I see." Grant opened the cabin door and stood back to let her enter. It was small, one room with a narrow bed, a pot-bellied stove, a table and chair, and hooks on the wall for clothes. A rag rug covered part of the rough wooden floor, and the window let in light that made the space feel less confined than it was. Simple. Plain. Perfect. "Privy's out back," Grant said. "You'll take meals in the main house kitchen. Boss said you'll eat after the men are fed. There's a pump behind the house for washing. Bunkhouse is over there." He pointed through the window. "But the men know to stay clear of this cabin. Boss made that real clear." Adeline set her carpet bag on the bed. Her hands were shaking, and she pressed them against her skirt to still them. "When do I start?" "Breakfast is at 5. "The men start work at dawn, so they eat early." Grant paused. "I won't lie to you, ma'am. It's hard work. 20 hungry men eat like a plague of locusts, and they'll complain if the food's bad and forget to thank you if it's good. But," he met her eyes, "Boss says you need this job. That true?" "Yes." "Then do it right, and you'll be fine. Do it wrong, and you'll know within a week." He tipped his hat. "I'll send someone with your trunk when the supply wagon comes next week. For now, get settled. Supper's at 6 if you want to see the kitchen before tomorrow." He left, closing the door behind him with a gentle click. Adeline stood in the center of her new home, this rough little cabin on the edge of nowhere, and felt the weight of the last 2 years finally begin to lift. Not gone. The grief, the fear, the bone-deep exhaustion would never truly leave, but lighter. She had a door she could lock, a bed that was hers, work that would feed her and maybe, eventually, give her back some piece of the dignity she'd lost when Thomas died and left her with nothing but debts and shame. It wasn't St. Louis. It wasn't the life she'd imagined as a young bride, but it was hers. She unpacked her carpet bag slowly, hanging her 2 dresses on the wall hooks, setting Thomas's pocket watch on the small table beside the bed. The book of poems went on the windowsill where she could see it every morning. When everything was arranged, she sat on the bed and let herself feel, really feel, for the first time since leaving Missouri. Scared, exhausted, hopeful, alive. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the ranch, men calling to each other, horses nickering, the steady rhythm of work and life continuing. Somewhere, Cole Mercer was unloading supplies. Somewhere, Grant Holloway was probably warning the men to behave. Somewhere, the sun was sliding toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and fire. Adeline stood, smoothed her dress, and walked to the main house. The kitchen was larger than she'd expected. A long room with a massive cast-iron stove, wooden counters scarred from years of use, and shelves stocked with supplies. A pump stood over a deep sink, and a long table dominated the center of the space where the men would eat. It smelled like bacon grease and coffee and hard work. She ran her hand over the counter, testing its height, opening drawers to find knives and spoons and the tools of her trade. The stove would need cleaning. The floors were gritty with tracked-in dirt, but the bones were good. She could work with this. "You'll find everything you need." Adeline turned. Cole Mercer stood in the doorway, watching her with that same careful assessment he'd used at the store. In the golden afternoon light, he looked tired, deep down tired, the kind that came from years of carrying weight alone. "The pantry's well stocked," he continued. "Grant keeps a list of supplies. Anything you need, tell him, and we'll get it on the next trip to town." He paused. "The men eat simple: meat, beans, bread, coffee, nothing fancy. Just filling." "I understand." "Breakfast at 5. Lunch at noon. Grant or one of the hands will bring it out to wherever the men are working. Supper at 6, here in the kitchen." His eyes held hers. "You'll hear complaints. Ignore them. If anyone crosses a line, you come to me immediately. I don't care if it's the middle of the night." The protectiveness in his voice surprised her. This was more than just an employer setting rules. This was a man who meant what he said. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer." "Cole, we don't stand on formality out here." He turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing. Tomorrow morning, after you've fed the men, come to my office. There's paperwork, employment contract, wage agreement. I keep everything documented." "Of course." He nodded and left, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Adeline stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the ranch settle into evening. Through the window, she watched the sun sink lower, watched the men drift toward the bunkhouse, watched the land turn from gold to amber to shadow. Tomorrow, she would rise before dawn and prove she belonged here. Tomorrow, she would cook for 20 hungry men and show them that a widow from St. Louis could survive anything. Tomorrow, her new life would truly begin. But tonight, standing in this kitchen that smelled like coffee and possibility, Adeline Carter allowed herself one moment of pure, uncomplicated gratitude. She had made it. Against every odd, every whisper, every obstacle, she had made it. And she would be damned if she'd let anyone take this away from her. The night passed slowly. Adeline lay in her narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in the distance, horses moving in the corral, the creak of wood settling in the cooling air. Sleep came in fits and starts, broken by anxiety and anticipation in equal measure. When she finally drifted off, she dreamed of fire and water, of Thomas's face fading like smoke, of a voice telling her to hold on just a little longer. She woke to darkness and the sound of roosters crowing. 4:30 by Thomas's pocket watch. Time to prove herself. Adeline dressed quickly in the dim light, pinning her hair up in a practical bun and tying on the apron she'd packed. The morning air was cold when she stepped outside, sharp and clean, nothing like the thick humidity of St. Louis summers. Stars still blazed overhead, so many she could never hope to count them all. The kitchen was dark and silent when she arrived. She lit lamps, fired up the stove, and took stock of what she had to work with. Bacon, eggs, flour for biscuits, coffee beans. Simple, like Cole had said. But simple done well was better than fancy done poorly. She worked quickly, efficiently, falling into the rhythm she'd learned over a decade of marriage and then refined in boarding house kitchens where every minute counted. Bacon sizzled in cast iron pans. Biscuits rose in the oven. Eggs cracked into bowls, waiting to be scrambled. Coffee percolated, filling the room with its rich, dark scent. By 5 o'clock, when she heard the bunkhouse door slam and boots on gravel, everything was ready. The men came in groups, 3s and 4s, hair still wet from washing, clothes dusty but faces scrubbed. They stopped when they saw her, a moment of surprise and uncertainty crossing their features. Then Grant Holloway's voice cut through the hesitation. "You heard the boss. Mrs. Carter's our cook now. Say good morning and sit down." "Morning, ma'am," they mumbled, a ragged chorus of voices as they filed to the table. Adeline served them without fanfare. Platters of bacon, bowls of scrambled eggs, baskets of biscuits still steaming from the oven. She poured coffee into tin cups, noting which men took it black and which added sugar. She watched their faces as they ate, gauging reactions. Silence at first, then, slowly, nods. A few appreciative grunts. One young cowhand, couldn't be more than 18, looked up with eyes wide with something like reverence. "Ma'am," he said softly, "these are the best biscuits I've had since my ma passed." The room went quiet. Adeline felt her throat tighten, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm glad you enjoyed them." The boy ducked his head, embarrassed by his own emotion, and returned to eating. But something had shifted in the room. The men relaxed, their shoulders loosening, their conversation resuming in low tones that felt less guarded. Cole Mercer was the last to arrive. He came through the door at 5:15, his hair damp and his shirt clean but already carrying the scent of horses and leather. His eyes swept the kitchen, taking in the men eating, the clean counters, Adeline standing by the stove with a pot of coffee. "Morning," he said to the room in general. "Boss, yes," Grant said around a mouthful of biscuit. "You were right about her cooking." Cole's gaze found Adeline's. "Good." That was all. Just good. But somehow it felt like more. He sat at the head of the table, and Adeline brought him a plate, serving him as she had the others. When she poured his coffee, their hands nearly brushed, an accidental moment of proximity that made her pull back quickly. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." The men finished eating and filed out, some tipping their hats to Adeline, others nodding their thanks. Within 20 minutes, the kitchen was empty except for the dirty dishes and Cole, who remained seated, his coffee cup still half full. "You did well," he said, not looking at her. "Better than I expected, honestly. I've had practice. I can tell." He drained his coffee and stood. "Come to my office in an hour. We'll handle the paperwork." Then he was gone, and Adeline was alone with a mountain of dishes and a strange, warm feeling in her chest that she didn't dare name. She washed every plate, every fork, every cup until they gleamed. She scrubbed the counters and swept the floor. She set bread dough to rise for lunch and started a pot of beans simmering for supper. By the time she walked to Cole's office, a small room attached to the main house, her hands smelled like lye soap and her back ached, but the kitchen was spotless. Cole sat behind a battered desk covered in ledgers and papers. He gestured to a chair. "Standard employment contract," he said, sliding a document across the desk. "Wages are $30 a month, paid on the 1st. Room and board included. You're entitled to 1 day off per week, Sunday, unless there's an emergency. You can terminate the agreement with 2 weeks' notice. I can do the same." Adeline read the contract carefully. Everything he'd said was there, written in clear, business-like language. At the bottom was a line for her signature. "Do you have questions?" Cole asked. "No, it's fair." "Then sign." She did, her handwriting careful and neat despite her nervousness. Cole signed as well, then filed the contract in a drawer. "There's one more thing." He pulled out a small leather pouch and counted out bills, which he slid across the desk. $15, half a month's wages as advance in case you need anything. Adeline stared at the money. It was more cash than she'd held in 2 years. "I can't." "You can. Consider it a show of faith." His expression was unreadable. "You left St. Louis with nothing. I know what that looks like. Take it. Buy yourself whatever you need in town when Grant makes the supply run next week." Pride warred with pragmatism. Pride lost. "Thank you," she said quietly, taking the money. "I'll earn it, I promise." "You already are." The words settled between them, simple and true. Adeline stood, smoothing her apron. "I should get back. Lunch won't make itself." Cole nodded, already turning back to his ledgers. But as she reached the door, he spoke again. "Mrs. Carter," she turned. "Welcome to Mercer Ridge." This time, when their eyes met, something passed between them. An understanding, maybe. An acknowledgement that they were both people who'd lost things and kept going anyway. That they'd both chosen this hard, unforgiving place because it was honest in a way the rest of the world wasn't. "Thank you, Cole," she said. His name felt strange on her tongue. Intimate, almost. But he'd asked her to use it, and out here, formality was just another weight neither of them needed to carry. She returned to the kitchen and worked through the day, learning the rhythm of the ranch. Lunch was sandwiches and the beans she'd started that morning, packed into tin pails and loaded onto a wagon for Grant to take out to the men. Supper was roast beef, potatoes, and more biscuits, served to a grateful crowd who ate like they'd been starving. By the time she cleaned up after supper and stumbled back to her cabin, Adeline was so exhausted she could barely see straight. But it was a good exhaustion, earned, purposeful. She collapsed into bed fully dressed and slept without dreaming. The days that followed blurred together into a routine that was grueling but strangely satisfying. She rose before dawn, cooked 3 meals a day, kept the kitchen running like a military operation. The men began to relax around her, offering shy greetings, sometimes lingering after meals to chat. She learned their names, their quirks, which ones liked extra salt and which couldn't stomach pepper. Grant Holloway became an unexpected ally. He brought her supplies without being asked, fixed the squeaky hinge on the pantry door, and ran interference when one of the younger hands got too familiar with his questions. His wife had died years ago, he told her one evening while helping carry water for dishes, and he'd never thought he'd see a woman's touch on this ranch again. "You're good for morale," he said. "Good for the boss, too. He's been alone too long." Adeline didn't know how to respond to that, so she just nodded and focused on her work. Cole remained a distant but steady presence. He ate meals with the men, worked alongside them from dawn until dusk, and treated Adeline with unfailing courtesy that somehow never crossed into warmth. But she'd catch him watching her sometimes, assessing, thoughtful, and wonder what he saw. Did he see a capable cook, a business arrangement that was working out? Or something more? She told herself it didn't matter. She was here to work, to survive, to build something stable. Getting tangled up in feelings, especially for her employer, would be the height of foolishness. But in the quiet moments, alone in her cabin with Thomas's pocket watch ticking beside her bed, she couldn't help but notice how her heart rate picked up when Cole's voice rumbled through the kitchen, or how the air seemed to change when he entered a room. It was ridiculous. She was 30 years old, a widow, a woman whose only value here was her ability to cook and keep house. Cole Mercer was her employer, nothing more. And yet, 2 weeks into her employment, everything changed. It started with a young ranch hand named Danny, the same boy who'd complimented her biscuits that first morning. He was working with a new horse, a beautiful chestnut mare with wild eyes and a fear of rope. Adeline was bringing lunch out to the men when she heard the commotion, shouting, the horse screaming, an awful sound that made her blood run cold. She dropped the lunch pails and ran. The mare had Danny pinned against the corral fence, her hooves flashing dangerously close to his head. The boy was trying to crawl away, but his leg was twisted at a wrong angle and blood soaked through his jeans. Other hands were trying to rope the horse to distract her, but the mare was beyond reason, terrified and dangerous. Adeline didn't think. She climbed the fence and jumped into the corral. "Mrs. Carter, no!" Grant's voice, somewhere behind her. "Get out of there!" But she was already moving, walking slowly toward the horse with her hands raised, her voice low and steady. "Easy, girl, easy now. Nobody's going to hurt you." The mare's ears flattened, and for a moment Adeline thought she'd made a terrible mistake. Then the horse's eyes found hers, wild, terrified, and something shifted. "That's it. You're all right. You're safe." Adeline kept talking, kept moving, until she was close enough to touch the mare's trembling neck. The horse flinched, but didn't bolt. Behind them, Danny whimpered in pain. "Someone get him out," Adeline said softly, not taking her eyes off the horse. Slowly. Hands reached through the fence, pulling Danny to safety. The mare skittered sideways, but Adeline stayed with her, murmuring nonsense words, keeping her voice calm and her movements gentle. "You're all right, sweetheart. Nobody here wants to hurt you." Gradually, impossibly, the horse began to calm. Her breathing slowed, her ears came forward, and when Adeline finally stepped back and opened the corral gate, the mare trotted out peacefully, as if nothing had happened. Adeline's knees nearly gave out. She grabbed the fence for support, suddenly shaking so hard her teeth chattered. That, Cole's voice said from directly behind her, was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen. She turned. He stood 3 feet away, his face ashen, his eyes burning with something between fury and fear. Danny was hurt, she said simply. So you decided to get yourself killed? His hands clenched at his sides. That horse could have crushed your skull. But she didn't, because you got lucky. He took a step closer, and she could see he was trembling too. Don't ever do that again. If someone's in danger, don't ever do that again. They stared at each other, both breathing hard, while around them the ranch descended into organized chaos. Someone was fetching the doctor from town. Grant was seeing to Danny, whose leg was broken but who would live. The mare was being led away, still skittish but no longer dangerous. And Adeline stood in the corral with Cole Mercer, who looked at her like she'd just torn his world apart, and he couldn't decide whether to shake her or... I need to check on Danny, she said, breaking the moment. She climbed out of the corral on trembling legs and went to where the boy lay, pale and sweating, but conscious. Let me see. His leg was definitely broken. A clean fracture from the look of it, but she'd need to stabilize it until the doctor arrived. She sent someone for clean cloth and whiskey, then got to work. Danny gritted his teeth as she cleaned and bound the wound, but he didn't cry out. Thank you, ma'am, he gasped, for saving me. Thank you for giving me a reason to be brave, she said, and meant it, because something had happened in that corral, something more than just saving a boy from a frightened horse. For the first time since Thomas died, Adeline had felt truly alive. Terrified, yes. Reckless, definitely. But alive. And when she glanced up to find Cole still watching her, his expression a complicated knot of emotions she couldn't untangle, she realized she wasn't the only one who'd felt it. Something had changed. The ground beneath her feet had shifted, and there was no going back. The doctor arrived 3 hours later, a gruff man named Henderson who'd seen more broken bones than he cared to count. He examined Danny's leg, nodded approvingly at Adeline's field dressing, and set the fracture with practiced efficiency while the boy bit down on a leather strap and tears streamed down his face. Clean break, Henderson said, washing his hands in the basin Adeline provided. He'll be off his feet for 6 weeks, maybe 8. Keep the wound clean, change the dressing daily, and for the love of all that's holy, don't let him put weight on it until I say so. I'll see to it, Grant said, hovering nearby like a worried parent. Henderson packed his bag and turned to Adeline. You did good work, Mrs. Carter. That binding probably saved his leg from worse damage. He paused, studying her with sharp eyes. Word in town was you'd last maybe a week out here. Seems they underestimated you. Seems so, Adeline said quietly. After the doctor left, she helped move Danny to a cot in the bunkhouse, where he could rest comfortably. The other men gathered around, offering awkward comfort and terrible jokes to lift his spirits. The boy managed a weak smile, his eyes finding Adeline's. You walked right up to that horse like you weren't afraid of nothing, he said. How'd you do that? Adeline smoothed the blanket over him, remembering the moment, the terror singing in her veins, the absolute certainty that she would do whatever it took to save him. I was terrified, she admitted, but being afraid doesn't mean you stop moving. It just means you move carefully. Danny nodded, processing this. My ma used to say something like that, before the cholera took her. The room went quiet. These men, Adeline was learning, had all lost something. Parents, siblings, homes. They'd come west seeking the same thing she had, a place to belong, a chance to rebuild. Your mother was right, she said softly. Now rest. Doctor's orders. She left them there, their low voices drifting after her as they settled in for the night. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and red, and her body ached from the adrenaline crash. But there was still supper to prepare, a kitchen to clean, a routine that wouldn't pause just because she'd nearly gotten herself killed. Cole was waiting on the porch of the main house when she approached. We need to talk, he said. Not a request. Adeline followed him into his office, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. He closed the door behind them. an unusual formality that made the small room feel even smaller, and turned to face her. "What you did today was reckless," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Brave, yes, but reckless. Danny was in danger. So were you." Cole's jaw tightened. "That horse could have killed you, Adeline. One kick to the head and—" He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration that looked unfamiliar on him. "You don't understand what that would have meant." The use of her first name sent a small shock through her. In 3 weeks, he'd never once used it. "I understand perfectly," she said, keeping her voice steady. "But I also understand that I couldn't stand there and watch a boy die when I might be able to help." "Why?" The question came out harsh, almost desperate. "Why would you risk your life for someone you barely know?" "Because I know what it feels like to lose everything and keep breathing anyway," she wanted to say. "Because I've been that boy, trapped and helpless while the world crashes down. Because for 2 years I've been invisible, worthless, discarded, and today I did something that mattered." But she couldn't say any of that, not to him, not yet. "Because it was the right thing to do," she said instead. Cole stared at her, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't expected. Fear. Real, bone-deep fear. Not anger, not frustration. Fear. "I can't lose another person on this ranch," he said quietly. "Do you understand? I can't." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning she couldn't quite grasp. Another person. Who had he lost? "I'll be more careful," she said, because it was all she could offer. "You'll be more than careful. You'll stay away from dangerous animals. You won't climb into corrals with spooked horses. And if there's ever a situation like that again, you'll get one of the men." His voice had shifted back to employer mode, firm, commanding. "That's not a request." Understood. But they both knew she was lying. If the situation arose again, she'd do exactly what she'd done today. And from the resignation in Cole's eyes, he knew it too. He sighed, the fight draining out of him. "Get some rest. You've earned it." Adeline left before he could see how badly she was shaking. The days that followed took on a different rhythm. The men treated her with a new kind of respect that bordered on reverence. They called her ma'am with genuine warmth, sought her out for advice on everything from sewing torn shirts to writing letters home, and defended her honor with a ferocity that both touched and alarmed her. When a supply wagon came through and the driver made a crude joke about the ranch's new entertainment, 3 cowhands stepped forward with expressions that promised violence. Grant had to physically hold them back while Adeline calmly informed the driver that his services wouldn't be needed in the future. "Boys," she said that night at supper, when the tension still hung thick in the air, "I appreciate the loyalty, but I fought my own battles long before I came here, and I'll keep fighting them. You don't need to defend me from every idiot with a loose tongue." "But ma'am," one of the younger hands started. "No buts. I'm not made of glass." She looked around the table, meeting each man's eyes in turn. "I'm here to work, same as you. Treat me like part of the crew, not like some delicate flower that needs protecting." A beat of silence. Then Grant chuckled, a rough sound that broke the tension like a stone through ice. "You heard her, boys. She's one of us now." He raised his coffee cup. "To Mrs. Carter, toughest damn cook in Wyoming territory." "To Mrs. Carter," they chorused, and the meal continued with the easy camaraderie she'd come to treasure. But Cole's reaction was different. He watched from his place at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. And when their eyes met across the crowded room, Adeline felt that same electric awareness that had sparked between them in the corral. Something was building between them. Something neither of them knew how to name or navigate. 3 weeks after the incident with the horse, Adeline woke before dawn to find frost covering her cabin window in delicate patterns. Autumn was coming early this year, Grant had mentioned. Soon the real cold would set in, and winter in Wyoming was nothing like winter in St. Louis. She dressed quickly, adding an extra shawl against the chill, and headed to the kitchen. The routine was familiar now. Light the lamps, fire up the stove, start the coffee. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, her mind already planning the day's meals. She was rolling out biscuit dough when she heard footsteps on the porch. Too early for the men. Too heavy to be Grant. Cole appeared in the doorway, his hair damp and his expression troubled. "Couldn't sleep?" Adeline asked, not looking up from her work. No. He moved into the kitchen, pouring himself coffee from the pot that was always ready. Mind if I sit? It's your kitchen. It's yours, actually. I just own the building. The observation was so unexpectedly wry that Adeline glanced up in surprise. Cole was leaning against the counter, coffee cup in hand, watching her with something that looked almost like curiosity. Couldn't sleep either? He asked. I sleep fine. Just wake early. She cut the biscuits with quick, precise movements and arranged them in the pan. Old habit. From St. Louis. Adeline hesitated. They'd never talked about her past beyond the bare facts, never discussed the details of the life she'd left behind. But there was something about the pre-dawn quiet, the intimacy of this shared space, that made honesty feel less dangerous. From marriage, she said quietly. My husband kept irregular hours. I learned to wake when he did, make sure he had breakfast before work. She slid the biscuits into the oven. The habit stuck, even after he died. Yes. Cole was quiet for a moment, sipping his coffee. Then, what did he do? Your husband. He was a clerk, bank office work mostly. Adeline turned back to the counter, starting on the bacon. Steady job, decent pay, until the gambling debts came to light. She hadn't meant to say that last part. It slipped out, bitter and honest, and she immediately regretted it. But Cole didn't recoil or judge, he just nodded, as if he'd suspected something like that all along. That's why you left? That's why I had nothing to leave with. The bacon hit the hot pan with a satisfying sizzle. Thomas died owing more money than I knew existed. The creditors took everything, the house, the furniture, my wedding ring. I was lucky to keep my clothes. She laughed, a harsh sound. Lucky. That's what the charity ladies called it. You're so lucky to be young and healthy. You'll find work. As if work grew on trees in St. Louis for widows with no references and no family. So you came west. So I ran west. Adeline flipped the bacon, watching the fat render and pop. Because staying meant starving slowly, and I'd already lost enough. I wasn't going to lose myself too. The silence that followed felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. Cole moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him in the cool morning air. I'm glad you came here, he said quietly. Adeline's hand stilled on the fork. Why? Because... He stopped, searching for words. Because this place needed someone like you. Someone who understands that surviving isn't the same as living. She turned to look at him then, really look at him. In the lamplight, the lines around his eyes were deeper, the gray in his hair more pronounced. He looked tired, soul tired, in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. Who did you lose? She asked. You said you couldn't lose another person on this ranch. Who was the first? Cole's expression shuddered, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down his coffee cup with careful precision and said, My father, 5 years ago. A riding accident. Horse threw him, broke his neck. He was dead before we could get him back to the house. His voice was flat, emotionless, but his hands were white-knuckled on the counter. And before that, my mother. Pneumonia, when I was 19. And before that, my brother. Drowned in Willow Creek when we were boys. Cole, this ranch has taken everyone I've ever loved. He looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was so raw it hurt to witness. So when you climbed into that corral with a terrified horse, when you risked your life for Danny, all I could think was, not again. I can't watch someone else die on this land. Adeline's throat tightened. Without thinking, she reached out and covered his hand with hers. His skin was warm, rough with calluses, trembling slightly. I'm not going to die, she said softly. Not today. Not from a horse or hard work or anything else this ranch throws at me. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'll fight like hell to stay alive. She squeezed his hand. I've got too much left to do, too much left to prove. Cole turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers in a gesture so natural it felt like coming home. They stood like that for a long moment, connected by shared grief and stubborn hope, while the bacon cooked and the sky outside lightened from black to gray. Then footsteps sounded on the porch, Grant's distinctive heavy tread, and they pulled apart like guilty children. Morning, Grant said, stopping in the doorway with raised eyebrows. Am I interrupting something? Just an early start, Cole said, his voice carefully neutral. He drained his coffee and set the cup in the sink. I'll be in the north pasture if anyone needs me. He left without looking back, and Adeline turned to the stove before Grant could see the color in her cheeks.
So, Grant said, pouring himself coffee. That was interesting. The bacon's almost ready. I wasn't talking about the bacon. He leaned against the counter, watching her with shrewd eyes. How long has this been going on? There's nothing going on. Sure there isn't. That's why you two were holding hands at 5 in the morning like a couple of kids at a church social. Adeline whirled on him. Grant, relax. I'm not judging. His expression softened. Boss has been alone since his father died. Worked himself half to death trying to keep this place running, never took time for anything else. Watching him actually talk to someone, let his guard down even a little. He shook his head. That's not nothing, Adeline. And the way he looks at you, that's definitely not nothing. He's my employer. He's a man who's been lonely too long, same as you're a woman who deserves better than the hand life dealt you. Grant set down his cup. I'm not saying rush into anything stupid, but don't pretend there's nothing there when everyone with eyes can see it. Before Adeline could respond, the bunkhouse door slammed and the first wave of hungry ranch hands descended. The moment for private conversation evaporated, replaced by the organized chaos of breakfast service. But Grant's words stayed with her throughout the day, echoing in quiet moments when she caught herself looking for Cole across the yard, or feeling her heart skip when his voice carried through the kitchen window. Don't pretend there's nothing there. But what if acknowledging it meant risking everything she'd fought so hard to build? What if this fragile new life shattered under the weight of feelings she had no right to have? Better to focus on work. On the meals that needed cooking, the men who needed feeding, the routine that kept her grounded. Yet that night, when Cole came to the kitchen after supper and helped her wash dishes in companionable silence, their shoulders brushing occasionally in the confined space, Adeline couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Something was happening between them, something deeper than gratitude or respect or shared understanding, something that terrified her almost as much as it called to her. The next morning brought new challenges. One of the cattle had gotten sick, bloat, Grant diagnosed, and the entire crew spent the day trying to save the animal. They succeeded, barely, but the scare put everyone on edge. Sick cattle could mean the beginning of an outbreak, and an outbreak could destroy the herd. Adeline threw herself into work, cooking enormous meals to keep the men's strength up, preparing poultices and remedies from the limited medical supplies they had on hand. She'd learned basic animal doctoring from a farm wife back in Missouri, and now she put that knowledge to use, working alongside the men in the barn until her arms ached and her dress was ruined with mud and worse. You don't have to do this, Cole said, finding her in the barn near midnight, still monitoring the sick cow. This isn't in your job description. Neither was saving Danny from a horse, but I did that too. She didn't look up from the cow, whose breathing had finally stabilized. Besides, if this herd dies, the ranch dies. And if the ranch dies, I'm out of a job. So yes, I do have to do this. Cole crouched beside her, studying the cow with practiced eyes. She's gonna make it, thanks to you. Thanks to all of us. No, thanks to you. He turned to face her fully. Grant told me what you did today, how you diagnosed the bloat before anyone else saw it, how you mixed the drench that saved her. Where did you learn that? Farm wife in Missouri. I helped her sometimes when Thomas was working late. Adeline stroked the cow's flank, feeling the steady rise and fall of breath. She said every woman should know how to keep things alive because men were too ready to give up and call the doctor. Cole laughed, an actual laugh, rusty from disuse but genuine. Sounds like a smart woman. She was, died in childbirth 3 years ago, her 4th baby. Adeline's voice went quiet. The baby died too. Both of them gone because the doctor was drunk when they called for him, and by the time he sobered up, it was too late. Is that why you... Cole stopped himself, but Adeline knew what he was asking. Why I never had children? She met his eyes. No. We tried. For 10 years we tried. I had one pregnancy that lasted 6 months before... She swallowed hard. Before I lost her. After that, nothing. The doctor said sometimes bodies just don't cooperate. I'm sorry. So am I. She stood, brushing straw from her skirt. But sorrow doesn't change anything. Work does. Action does. So that's what I focus on. Cole stood as well, and in the dim lantern light of the barn, with the smell of hay and animals around them and the cow breathing steadily between them, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so tender, so unexpected, that Adeline's breath caught. "You're remarkable," he said quietly. "I hope you know that." Before she could respond, before she could even process what was happening, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the cow and a heart that was beating far too fast. The following week, Grant announced they needed to make a supply run to Red Hollow. The ranch was running low on essentials, and winter supplies needed to be ordered before the first snow hit. "You should come," Grant said to Adeline at breakfast. "Get whatever you need for the kitchen. Maybe pick up some fabric or whatever women buy in town." Adeline hesitated. The thought of facing Red Hollow again with its stares and whispers made her stomach clench. But they did need supplies, and she was tired of letting fear dictate her actions. "All right," she said. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow at dawn. Boss is coming too. He's got business at the bank." The next morning, Adeline dressed in her better dress and pinned her hair up carefully. She told herself the extra effort had nothing to do with Cole, but when she caught her reflection in the small mirror, she knew she was lying. The ride to town was quiet. Grant drove the supply wagon while Adeline and Cole rode alongside on horseback. She'd borrowed one of the gentler mares, and despite her initial nervousness, riding came back to her easier than expected. Thomas had taught her years ago, before the gambling started, when they were still happy. Red Hollow looked the same as the day she'd arrived, dusty, small, unwelcoming. But this time, when she dismounted in front of the general store, she did so with her head high and her shoulders back. Mrs. Carter, the store owner, a thin man named Wilson, greeted her with careful politeness. "What can I get for you today?" She handed him her list, watching as his eyebrows rose. "That's a lot of flour," he observed. "I cook for 20 men. They eat a lot of bread." "I suppose they do." He began gathering items, and Adeline wandered the store, running her fingers over bolts of fabric, examining cookware she couldn't afford yet, but might someday. That's when she heard the voices outside. Shameful is what it is. A woman's voice, sharp with judgment. A widow living among all those men. It's not natural. "I heard she actually climbed into a corral with a wild horse. Can you imagine? What kind of woman does such a thing?" "The kind who's looking for attention from men. That's what kind." Adeline's hand stilled on a bolt of blue calico. The voices continued, oblivious to the fact that she could hear every word. "Mark my words, there'll be trouble at that ranch. You can't put a woman in that situation and expect things to stay proper." Something hot and furious rose in Adeline's chest. She turned toward the door, ready to march outside and confront them, but a hand on her arm stopped her. Cole stood beside her, his expression carved from granite. "Let me," he said quietly. He walked outside, and Adeline followed despite his implicit request to stay put. She wasn't going to hide while others fought her battles. Two women stood on the porch, the preacher's wife and the mayor's sister, both dressed in their Sunday best despite it being a Thursday. They fell silent when Cole appeared, their faces coloring with embarrassment. "Ladies," Cole said, his voice cold as January ice, "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation about my employee. Mr. Mercer, we didn't mean, you meant every word." He descended the steps until he was at eye level with them. "Let me be very clear. Mrs. Carter is a respectable, hardworking woman who has done more for my ranch in 6 weeks than most people do in a lifetime. She saved a young man's life. She works harder than half my crew, and she deserves your respect, not your gossip. But surely you can see how it looks. I see a widow trying to survive in a world that gives women very few options. I see courage and dignity and strength." His voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "What I don't see is how any of this is your concern." The mayor's sister drew herself up. "We're concerned for the moral welfare of our community." "Then I suggest you focus on your own moral welfare and leave Mrs. Carter out of your conversations." Cole's eyes were hard as flint. "Because the next person I hear spreading rumors about her will find their credit cut off at my bank. Are we clear?" The threat landed like a physical blow. Both women paled. The Mercer family bank was the only one in 3 counties,
and being blacklisted would be a social and financial disaster. Perfectly clear, the preacher's wife said stiffly. They hurried away, heads high but steps quick, and Cole turned to find Adeline standing in the doorway. I told you to let me handle it, she said, but there was no heat in the words. She was too stunned by what she'd just witnessed. I handled it. You threatened them. I promise consequences. There's a difference. He moved past her into the store. You shouldn't have to defend yourself against people who wouldn't survive a week doing what you do every day. Adeline followed him inside, her mind reeling. No one had ever defended her like that. Not Thomas, who'd been too weak to stand up to his gambling friends. Not the charity ladies in St. Louis, who judged her even as they handed her bread. No one. Thank you, she said quietly. Cole glanced at her, and for just a moment his expression softened. You're welcome. They finished the shopping in silence, loaded the wagon, and started back to the ranch. But something had shifted between them again. Another brick removed from the walls they'd both built around their hearts. That night, after the men had been fed and the kitchen cleaned, Adeline sat on her cabin porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The air was cool, carrying the first real bite of approaching winter, and she wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Footsteps approached through the darkness. Mine company? Cole asked. Not at all. He sat beside her on the step, close enough that their shoulders touched. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just sat together, watching the stars multiply overhead, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. I meant what I said in town, Cole said finally, about you being remarkable. You also threatened to destroy those women's credit. I meant that too. He turned to look at her, and in the starlight, his eyes were soft. I've spent 5 years running this ranch alone, Adeline. 5 years of eating burned food and sleeping in an empty house and working myself half to death because there was nothing else to do. And then you showed up with your carpet bag and your stubborn dignity, and suddenly everything's different. Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. Different how? The men laugh at meals now. The kitchen smells like home instead of failure. I wake up in the morning and actually look forward to breakfast because I know you'll be there. He reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together, just like he had in the kitchen that dawn. You've brought life back to this place, back to me. Adeline couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All she could do was feel the warmth of his hand, the solid presence of him beside her, the terrifying hope rising in her chest. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I. I don't know how to do this, how to be more than what I am. You're already more than you think you are. Cole lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture so old-fashioned and gentle it made her eyes sting. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I just needed you to know you're not just my cook, you're not just my employee, you're… Cole. She turned to face him fully. I lost everything once. My husband, my baby, my entire life. I don't know if I can survive losing everything again. Then don't. His voice was fierce now, urgent. Stay. Build something here. Let this be the place where you stop running and start living. And if it doesn't work, if I'm not what you think I am, then we'll figure it out together. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. I'm not asking for perfect. I'm asking for real, for honest, for whatever this is between us that we've both been trying to ignore. Adeline closed her eyes, letting herself feel the weight of his hands, the warmth of his touch. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was dangerous, that mixing work with feelings was a disaster waiting to happen, that she was risking the only stable thing in her life. But her heart, her battered, scarred, stubborn heart, whispered something different. Sometimes the biggest risk was not taking one at all. She opened her eyes and found him watching her with an expression so full of hope and fear and longing that it broke something open inside her. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay, let's figure it out together. She managed a shaky smile. But slowly, one day at a time, because I'm terrified and I don't know what I'm doing, and… He kissed her. It was soft, tentative, a question more than a demand. His lips were warm against hers, tasting of coffee and possibility, and for one perfect moment, The entire world narrowed to this, just the two of them on a cabin porch under a sky full of stars, finding courage in each other. When they pulled apart, Adeline was crying. "Sorry," she whispered, wiping at her eyes. "I don't know why I'm—" "Don't apologize." Cole pressed his forehead to hers. "This is worth crying over. You're worth crying over." They sat like that for a long time, holding each other in the darkness, while around them the ranch breathed and settled and continued on. Tomorrow there would be meals to cook and work to do, and a whole complicated reality to navigate. But tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Adeline Carter felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever. She felt home. The days that followed that kiss carried a different weight, lighter in some ways, heavier in others. Adeline and Cole moved around each other with a new awareness, their glances lingering a fraction longer, their conversations carrying undertones that hadn't existed before. They were careful, discreet, neither wanting to expose this fragile new thing to the scrutiny of 20 ranch hands who missed nothing. But Grant knew. Of course Grant knew. "You're humming," he observed one morning, watching Adeline roll out pie dough with unusual vigor. "I am not." "You absolutely are. Been humming for 3 days straight." He grinned into his coffee. "Wouldn't have anything to do with the boss spending an awful lot of time in the kitchen lately, would it?" Adeline threw a dish towel at him, which he caught with a laugh. "Leave it alone, Grant." "Can't do that. Someone's got to make sure you two don't moon over each other so obviously that the men start placing bets." He paused. "Well, more bets. They've already got a pool going on when the boss is going to officially court you." "They what?" Adeline's hand stilled on the rolling pin. $23 in the pot so far. My money's on Christmas, but young Danny, he's healing up nice, by the way, thinks it'll be Thanksgiving. Grant's expression softened. "They're happy for you both. We all are. Place feels different now. Better." Before Adeline could respond, the sound of hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Fast, urgent. She and Grant exchanged glances and rushed to the window. A rider Adeline didn't recognize was dismounting near the barn, his horse lathered and blowing hard. Cole emerged from the house, his face tightening when he saw who'd arrived. "That's Jim Patterson," Grant said quietly. "Runs a spread about 15 miles east. Good man. Wouldn't ride his horse near to death unless something was seriously wrong." They watched as Patterson spoke urgently to Cole, gesturing toward the east. Even from this distance, Adeline could see the tension in Cole's shoulders, the way his hands clenched at his sides. Then he turned toward the house, his expression grim, and she knew before he even spoke that their brief moment of peace was over. "Grant," Cole called, striding toward the kitchen, "get the men together, now." Within minutes, the entire crew had assembled in the yard. Patterson stood beside Cole, his hat in his hands, dust still coating his clothes. "Jim's place was hit last night," Cole said without preamble. "Someone cut his fences, scattered his herd, and burned his hay barn to the ground." A ripple of shock went through the men. Adeline felt her stomach drop. "Who would do that?" one of the hands asked. "Patterson thinks it was Langford's men," Cole said, his voice hard. 3 riders wearing bandanas. They didn't say a word, just did the damage and rode off. "Can you prove it was Langford?" Grant asked. "No, that's the point." Patterson's voice was rough with exhaustion and anger. "He's too smart to get his own hands dirty, but everyone knows he's been pressuring me to sell for months. This is his way of making his point." Cole's jaw tightened. "How bad is the damage?" "Bad enough. Lost a season's worth of hay, half my herd scattered to hell and back, and my fences are going to take weeks to repair." Patterson looked around at the assembled men. "I'm not here asking for charity. I'm here warning you. If Langford's willing to do this to me, he won't stop until he gets what he wants. And what he wants is control of every water source in this valley." The implications hung in the air like smoke. Mercer Ridge had the best water access for 50 miles. Willow Creek ran year-round, fed by mountain springs that never dried up. In a land where water meant survival, that made the ranch worth killing for. "You're staying here tonight," Cole said to Patterson. It wasn't a question. "Mrs. So, Carter will fix you a meal and we'll help you round up your herd at first light." "Cole, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." Cole turned to his men. "Double the watch tonight. 2 men on patrol at all times, rotating every 4 hours. Anyone sees riders who don't belong here, you wake me immediately. No heroics. Understood?" The men nodded, their faces set with determination. As they dispersed to their assignments, Adeline caught Cole's eye. He gave her a slight shake of his head. Not now. And she understood. Whatever conversation they needed to have would wait until the crisis passed. She fed Patterson a hot meal while he told Grant and Cole the details of the attack. The man was clearly shaken, not just by the destruction, but by the realization that his years of hard work could be undone in a single night of violence. "I built that barn with my own hands," he said quietly, staring into his coffee. "Took me 3 summers, and they burned it down in minutes. We'll help you rebuild," Cole said. "Why? So they can burn it again?" Patterson's laugh was bitter. "Langford's got money, connections, men willing to do his dirty work. What do I have? A failing ranch and a family to feed. You have neighbors who won't let you fight alone." Cole's voice was steel. "That's more than Langford has. Money can buy muscle, but it can't buy loyalty." Patterson looked up, hope and desperation warring in his eyes. "You really think we can stand against him?" "I know we can." Cole stood. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start fixing what he broke." After Patterson retired to the bunkhouse, Adeline found Cole standing on the porch, staring out at the darkening land. She approached quietly, standing beside him without touching. "How bad is this going to get?" she asked. "Bad." He didn't look at her. "Langford's been circling for months, buying up failing ranches, squeezing out anyone who won't sell. Patterson's place borders mine on the east. If Langford gets that land, he controls the eastern water access. Then he can price out everyone downstream. Including you. Including me." Cole's hands gripped the porch rail. "But it's not just about the water. It's about power. About one man thinking he can own an entire valley because he's got more money than everyone else combined." Adeline studied his profile in the fading light, the hard set of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. "What will you do?" "Help Patterson. Help anyone else Langford targets. Make it clear that we won't be intimidated." He finally turned to look at her. "But I need you to understand something. This could get dangerous. If Langford's willing to burn barns and scatter herds, he might be willing to do worse. I'm not leaving." "Adeline, no." She stepped closer, keeping her voice low. "I've run before, Cole. From debt, from shame, from a dozen different kinds of fear. I'm not running anymore. This ranch is my home now. You are—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. "I'm what?" His voice was soft, urgent. "You're the first good thing I've had in years, and I'll be damned if I let some land baron take that away without a fight." Cole pulled her into his arms, heedless of who might see, and held her tight enough that she could feel his heart hammering against her cheek. "I don't want you hurt," he murmured into her hair. "Then we'll have to make sure we win." The next 3 weeks were a blur of tension and back-breaking work. The men helped Patterson round up his scattered herd and repair his fences, all while maintaining double watches at Mercer Ridge. Adeline cooked enormous meals to keep everyone fed, occasionally riding out with lunch for the men working Patterson's land, her presence a reminder of what they were fighting to protect. The attacks continued, though not on Mercer Ridge. Another rancher, a widow named Mrs. Chen, who ran a small operation to the south, found her well poisoned. A young couple trying to homestead near the creek woke to find all their tools stolen. Each incident was untraceable, unprovable, but everyone knew who was behind it. Red Hollow began to change. Where there had been gossip about Adeline before, now there was something uglier, fear. The town was divided between those who wanted to stand against Langford and those who wanted to appease him. Businesses that had thrived for years suddenly found themselves struggling as Langford used his influence to redirect trade. The bank, Cole's family bank, became a target, with Langford spreading rumors about its solvency. "He's trying to isolate us," Grant observed one evening, studying a map of the valley with Cole and Adeline. "Pick us off one by one, make everyone too scared to band together." "Then we need to do the opposite," Adeline said. Both men looked at her. "We need to bring everyone together. Show Langford that this valley won't be divided." "How?" Cole asked. Adeline thought for a moment, an idea forming.
A gathering. Here at the ranch. Invite every family that's been targeted, every rancher who's feeling the pressure. Feed them, let them talk, let them see they're not alone. Grant's eyes lit up. A solidarity meeting. More than that, Adeline said, warming to the idea. A statement. We're not hiding. We're not ashamed. We're standing together. Cole was quiet, studying the map. Then he nodded slowly. Saturday. We'll host it Saturday. The announcement went out through informal channels, word of mouth, messages carried by sympathetic riders. By Saturday afternoon, 15 families had arrived at Mercer Ridge, their wagons rolling in throughout the day. Adeline had prepared enough food to feed a small army: roasted chickens, beef stew, fresh bread, pies made from the last of the autumn apples. She worked with a fierce determination, knowing that this meal was more than just sustenance. It was communion. It was resistance. It was a declaration that they would not be starved into submission. As the sun began to set, people gathered in the yard between the house and barn. Families with children, solitary ranchers, widows like Mrs. Chen who'd lost husbands to this hard land but refused to lose their homes too. They stood together, united by struggle and stubborn hope. Cole climbed onto a porch rail to address them, his voice carrying across the assembly. Most of you know why we're here, he began. Victor Langford wants our land, our water, our livelihoods. He thinks he can take them through intimidation and violence. He thinks we're too weak, too scattered to fight back. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. But he's wrong, Cole's voice strengthened. Because we're not alone. We're neighbors. We're a community. And together we're strong enough to stand against any bully with a fat wallet and no conscience. Easy to say, someone called out. Harder to do when your barn's burning. You're right, Cole acknowledged. It is hard. It's damn hard. But the alternative is worse. The alternative is surrendering everything we've built, everything we've fought for because one man thinks he can buy our fear. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled faces. I'm not saying there won't be more attacks. There probably will be. I'm not saying this will be easy. It won't be. But I am saying that if we stand together, if we help each other rebuild every time he tears us down, we can outlast him. Because his money will run out before our will does. The crowd erupted in applause and shouts of agreement. Adeline felt tears prick her eyes, watching Cole stand tall against the darkening sky, a leader born from necessity and grief. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. A rider appeared on the eastern ridge, a single figure silhouetted against the sunset. Even from a distance, Adeline could see the expensive cut of his clothes, the arrogant set of his shoulders. Victor Langford had come calling. He rode down slowly, deliberately, giving everyone time to see him approach. The crowd fell silent, tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. Cole descended from the porch rail, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. Langford dismounted with practiced ease, his expensive boots hitting the dirt with soft thuds. He was handsome in a polished way, silver hair, sharp features, eyes like chips of ice. Everything about him screamed money and power. Mercer, he said, his voice smooth as silk. Quite the gathering you've put together. Langford, Cole's voice was flat. You're not welcome here. Oh, I think I am. After all, I own half the land these good people are standing on. He smiled, showing too many teeth. Or I will soon enough. Grant moved to Cole's side, and several of the men shifted position, creating a subtle barrier between Langford and the families. The air grew thick with threat. You've made your intentions clear, Cole said. We've made ours equally clear. Now leave my property before I have you removed. Such hostility! Langford's gaze swept over the assembly, pausing when it landed on Adeline. His smile widened. And you must be the famous Mrs. Carter, the widow who's captured our rancher's heart and corrupted his good judgment. The insult hit like a slap. Adeline felt her face flame, but she held Langford's gaze without flinching. I'm the cook, she said evenly. Nothing more. Really? Because the rumors say quite different. They say you've bewitched poor Mercer here, turned him against sound business sense with feminine wiles. Langford took a step closer. They say you're the reason he's making stupid decisions, gathering people together for some futile resistance instead of accepting the inevitable. That's enough.
Cole's voice was dangerously quiet. Is it? Because I think the good people here deserve to know the truth. Langford addressed the crowd now, his voice carrying easily. You're following a man who's let a woman cloud his judgment. A desperate widow who showed up with nothing and latched onto the first man who'd have her. Is that really who you want leading this fight? The silence that followed was crushing. Adeline felt every eye on her, felt the weight of their judgment, their doubt. This was what Langford wanted, to divide them, to make her the weak point, the scandal that would tear apart their unity. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but Cole spoke first. You want to know the truth, he said, his voice ringing clear. The truth is that Mrs. Carter has more courage in her little finger than you have in your entire body. She's worked harder in 3 months than you've worked in your whole privileged life. She saved a young man's life when no one else could. She's turned a group of rough cowboys into a family. He took a step forward, and Langford actually backed up slightly. And yes, I care about her, deeply. But that doesn't cloud my judgment. It sharpens it. Because she's reminded me what's worth fighting for. Not just land or water or money, but people, community. The right to build a life without some Eastern aristocrat deciding he owns everything worth having. The crowd erupted in support, voices rising in agreement. Patterson stepped forward, then Mrs. Chen, then the young homesteading couple. One by one, they formed a wall between Langford and the families, their message clear. Langford's smile finally faltered. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. You're making a mistake, he said, but his voice had lost its confidence. No, Cole said quietly. You made the mistake. You thought you could divide us. You thought we'd turn on each other out of fear or shame. But you don't understand people like us. We're survivors, and we protect our own. He turned his back on Langford, a calculated insult, and addressed his neighbors. Everyone inside, let's eat. The crowd moved as one, flowing around Langford like water around a stone, ignoring him completely. The ultimate dismissal. Langford stood alone in the yard, his face flushed with humiliation and rage. Then he climbed back on his horse and rode away, but not before turning to deliver one final threat. This isn't over, Mercer. Not by a long shot. The words hung in the air even after he disappeared into the darkness. Inside, the meal proceeded with forced cheerfulness, everyone trying to shake off the encounter. But Adeline could see the worry in their eyes, hear the tremor in their laughter. Langford had rattled them, reminded them of the power he wielded. She moved through the crowd, serving food, offering quiet words of encouragement. Mrs. Chen squeezed her hand. Don't let what he said bother you, dear. That man wouldn't recognize decency if it bit him. I'm fine, Adeline said, though her hands were shaking. After the meal, as families began to depart with promises to watch out for each other, Cole found Adeline alone in the kitchen, scrubbing dishes with violent intensity. Hey, he said softly. She didn't turn around. I'm fine. You're not. He moved behind her, gently taking the dish from her hands and setting it down. What he said was designed to hurt. I know. She finally turned to face him, and the tears she'd been holding back spilled over. But it worked, Cole. Did you see their faces? The doubt? He made me the problem, the outsider who doesn't belong. He tried to, and failed. Cole wiped her tears with his thumbs. You heard them defending you. You saw them stand with us. Langford thought attacking you would break our unity, but it did the opposite. This time. What about next time? What about when he comes back with something worse? She pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. I won't be the reason this falls apart. I won't be the weakness he exploits. You're not weakness. You're strength. Cole turned her around, forcing her to look at him. And I need you to hear this. I don't regret a single word I said out there. Not about caring for you, not about what you mean to this ranch, not any of it. Even if it costs you everything, you are everything. The words were fierce, absolute. The ranch, the land, the fight. None of it means anything if I lose you in the process. Adeline's breath caught. She searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation, but found only certainty. I love you, Cole said quietly. I know it's fast, I know it's complicated, but I love you.
and I'm not going to hide that or apologize for it, no matter what Langford or anyone else thinks. The words hung between them, huge and terrifying and perfect. I love you too, Adeline whispered, and that terrifies me more than anything Langford could do. Cole pulled her close, holding her while she finally let herself cry. For the fear, for the fight ahead, for the impossible gift of being loved when she'd thought she'd lost that chance forever. Outside, the last wagon rolled away into the night. The ranch settled into watchful silence, guards posted, eyes scanning the darkness for threats. And in the kitchen, two people who'd been alone too long held each other and found the courage to keep fighting. The following week passed in tense anticipation. Everyone expected retaliation for the gathering, for the public humiliation Langford had suffered, but nothing happened. The silence was almost worse than action. It felt like the held breath before a scream. Then, on Thursday morning, Grant rode in fast from town, his face grim. "We've got problems," he announced, swinging down from his horse. "Big ones." Cole and Adeline met him at the barn. "What happened?" "Langford's filed a complaint with the territorial governor, claims we're harboring criminals. Says some of our hands are wanted men using false names. Says we're running an illegal operation that's threatening legitimate businesses." "That's insane," Cole said. "Every man here was vetted before hiring. Doesn't matter if it's true. Matters that he's got the governor's ear and enough money to make the investigation stick." Grant's expression was bleak. "There's more. He's convinced the town council to pass an ordinance. Any business operating in Red Hollow has to have a license from the council. Guess who controls the council?" The implications were staggering. Without access to town supplies, the ranch would struggle to survive winter. "He's trying to strangle us economically," Cole said slowly, "and legally. If that investigation gains traction, they could shut down the ranch entirely, confiscate the herd, maybe even arrest you." Grant looked between them. "We need to be smart about this. One wrong move, and he's got ammunition." That night, a special town meeting was called. Cole announced he was going, and before Adeline could ask, he said, "You're coming with me. If we hide you now, it proves Langford's point." The meeting hall was packed, standing room only, with tensions running high. Langford sat at the council table like a king holding court, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the rough work clothes of the ranchers and townspeople. The mayor, a weak-willed man named Perkins, who'd been in Langford's pocket for years, called the meeting to order. "We're here to discuss the recent disturbances in our peaceful community," Perkins began, reading from a prepared statement that had Langford's fingerprints all over it. "Reports have surfaced of questionable activities at certain ranches, including the harboring of criminals and the corruption of moral standards." "What corruption?" someone shouted from the crowd. Perkins cleared his throat nervously. "The presence of a woman of uncertain character living among men without proper supervision has raised concerns about the moral fabric of our community." The room erupted. Half the people shouted in protest, the other half in agreement. Adeline felt her face burn, but she kept her head high, her hands clasped calmly in her lap. Cole stood, and the room gradually quieted. "Mayor Perkins, with all due respect, you're spouting nonsense fed to you by a man who's trying to steal our land." He gestured to Langford. "This isn't about morality or law. It's about greed, pure and simple." "How dare you?" Langford said smoothly, rising to his feet. "I'm trying to protect this town from the kind of lawlessness that ruins communities. Your ranch has become a haven for troublemakers, and a woman of questionable reputation who's clearly using her feminine wiles to manipulate you." "That woman," Cole said, his voice deadly quiet, "has a name. It's Mrs. Adeline Carter. She's a widow, a skilled cook, and a woman of more integrity than you'll ever possess. And if you insult her again, we'll settle this outside." The challenge hung in the air like gun smoke. Langford paled slightly. For all his power and money, he wasn't a fighter, and everyone knew it. "Gentlemen, please," Perkins stammered. "We're here to discuss policy, not engage in threats." "Then let's discuss policy," Adeline said, rising to her feet. Every eye in the room swiveled to her. "Mr. Langford has accused me of corruption and manipulation. I'd like to hear specifically what I've done wrong. Is it working hard, feeding hungry men, saving a young man's life, participating in my community?" Silence.
Then a woman near the back stood, the mayor's wife, of all people. Mrs. Carter has done nothing wrong, she said clearly. In fact, she's done more good in 3 months than some of us have done in years. She organized food donations for the Chen family when their well was poisoned. She's been helping Mrs. Patterson while her husband recovers from the attack on their ranch. She's exactly the kind of woman we should be celebrating, not condemning. Other voices rose in agreement. Women Adeline barely knew stood to defend her, sharing stories of her kindness, her generosity, her strength. The tide in the room shifted perceptibly. Langford saw it happening and changed tactics. "This is all very touching," he said, "but it doesn't address the real issue. Water rights. Mercer Ridge controls access to Willow Creek, which affects every ranch downstream. That kind of power shouldn't rest in the hands of one man, especially one whose judgment has been compromised." "My judgment is fine," Cole said coldly. "And the water rights were established by my father 30 years ago, legally and fairly. If you want to challenge them, take it to a real court, not this kangaroo proceeding." "Perhaps I will," Langford smiled. "But in the meantime, this council has a responsibility to protect the community's interests. I'm proposing we establish an oversight committee to monitor the use of shared water resources." What he really meant was, "Give me control of your water, or I'll take it." Cole opened his mouth to respond, but Adeline touched his arm. She stepped forward, addressing the crowd directly. "I came to Red Hollow with nothing," she said, her voice carrying clearly. "A widow with no family, no money, no prospects. I could have given up, could have let the world break me, but I didn't. I fought, I survived, I built a new life from scratch." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room. "That's what everyone in this valley has done. We've all fought for what we have. We've all survived against odds. And now one man wants to take it all away because he thinks his money makes him better than us. But it doesn't. Money doesn't make you better. Character does. Courage does. Standing by your neighbors when times are hard does." She turned to Langford. "You asked what I've done to this community. I'll tell you. I've reminded people what it means to fight for what matters, to stand together instead of being divided, to choose courage over fear." The room erupted in applause. Even some of Langford's supporters looked uncertain now. The mayor banged his gavel weakly. "Mrs. Carter, this is highly irregular." "So is using a town meeting to wage a personal vendetta," she shot back. "If Mr. Langford has legitimate concerns about water rights or ranch operations, there are legal channels. But this? This is just a man who's used to getting his way throwing a tantrum because for once he can't buy what he wants." Langford's face went purple with rage. He stood so abruptly his chair fell backward. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "All of you. When you're losing your ranches, when you're struggling to survive winter, when everything falls apart, remember that you had a chance to do this the easy way." He stormed out, and the meeting dissolved into chaos. Cole pulled Adeline outside, away from the crowd, into the quiet darkness of the street. "That was either brilliant or suicidal," he said, but he was smiling. "I haven't decided which." "Probably both." Adeline was shaking with adrenaline. "Did I just make everything worse?" "No, you made everything clear." He cupped her face in his hands. "He's going to come after us now, really come after us. You understand that?" "I understand." She leaned into his touch. "But I meant what I said in there. I'm not backing down. Not from him, not from anyone." Cole kissed her then, right there in the middle of Red Hollow's main street where anyone could see. And when they finally pulled apart, Adeline saw faces in windows, people watching from porches. "Let them watch," she thought. "Let them see that we're not ashamed." They rode back to the ranch in silence, but it was a comfortable quiet, the kind shared by people who'd just crossed a line together and weren't looking back. When they arrived, Grant was waiting with news that made Adeline's blood run cold. "Riders came while you were gone," he said. "Didn't do anything, just circled the property line. Watching, counting, planning." "How many?" Cole asked. 6 that we saw. Could be more." Grant's expression was grim. "This is it, boss. The retaliation you knew was coming. Question is, what form will it take?" They didn't have to wait long for the answer. 2 nights later, fire lit the sky to the east. The alarm bell rang at 2 in the morning, shattering sleep with its urgent clanging. Adeline bolted upright in her narrow bed, heart already racing before her mind fully processed what was happening. Through her cabin window, she could see orange light painting the eastern sky. Too bright, too wrong for the hour. Fire. She dressed in seconds, pulling on her work dress and boots without bothering to pin up her hair properly. By the time she burst out of her cabin, the yard was already full of running men, voices shouting over each other in controlled panic. "It's the barn!" someone yelled. "The main barn's on fire!" Adeline's stomach dropped. The barn held everything: hay for winter feed, equipment worth more than most men earned in a year, and stalls for 12 horses, including Cole's prize stallion and the gentle mare she'd ridden to town. If it went up, the ranch would be crippled. Cole stood in the center of the chaos, issuing orders with a calm that belied the fear in his eyes. "Grant, get the horses out first. Danny, you and the boys form a bucket line from the creek. Everyone else, grab what equipment you can carry and get it clear." "What about the cattle?" one of the hands shouted. "Forget the cattle. They're in the pasture. They'll be fine. Focus on the barn." Men scattered like startled birds, each one moving with purpose despite the terror. Adeline ran toward the kitchen, her mind racing. Water. They needed water, and the creek was 200 yards away. The buckets would help, but not enough. Not nearly enough. The heat hit her before she reached the barn, a wall of scorching air that made her skin prickle and her eyes water. Flames licked up the eastern wall, consuming dried wood like kindling, spreading faster than seemed possible. Black smoke poured from the open doors where men were leading panicked horses into the night. Grant emerged with Cole's stallion, the massive animal rearing and fighting the lead rope. "Easy, boy, easy!" The horse's eyes showed white all around. Its nostrils flared in terror. Another hand ran out leading the mare Adeline had ridden. Then another horse, and another, until all 12 were clear, being held by men at the far edge of the yard. "That's all of them," Grant shouted. "Barn's clear." "Then get back," Cole yelled. "It's going to collapse." But even as he spoke, Adeline saw movement in the barn's upper loft, a flash of white that didn't belong. Her blood turned to ice. "Cole!" She grabbed his arm, pointing. "There's someone in the loft." He turned, squinting through the smoke. "That's impossible. We cleared—" Then he saw it too. A figure, small and stumbling, silhouetted against the flames. "Jesus Christ, that's Tommy!" Grant's voice cracked. Tommy was the youngest hand, barely 16, who'd joined them last month. He must have been sleeping in the loft despite strict orders never to do so. "Tommy!" Cole shouted. "Jump! We'll catch you!" But the boy was disoriented, coughing, crawling toward the edge and then pulling back as flames cut off his escape route. The fire was spreading too fast, consuming the wooden structure from the inside out. "We need a ladder," someone yelled. "No time," Cole said grimly. He started toward the barn entrance, but Grant grabbed him. "Boss, you can't. The whole thing's about to come down." "I'm not letting that boy die." Cole shook him off, but before he could take another step, Adeline was running. She didn't think, couldn't afford to think. Thinking meant recognizing the insanity of what she was doing, meant acknowledging that she could die, meant freezing when action was the only thing that mattered. She ran straight into the burning barn. The heat was overwhelming, a physical force that stole the air from her lungs. Smoke stung her eyes, turned the world into a nightmare of orange and black. She pulled her shawl over her mouth and nose, trying to filter the air, and looked up. Tommy was directly above her, clinging to a beam as fire crept closer. His face was black with soot, tears cutting clean tracks down his cheeks. "Mrs. Carter!" His voice was raw from smoke. I can't get down." "Yes, you can." She grabbed a coil of rope hanging on the wall, thank heaven it hadn't burned yet, and threw one end up to him. "Tie it around your waist, quickly!" The boy fumbled with the rope, his hands shaking. Behind Adeline, a beam cracked and fell, sending up a shower of sparks. The exit was still clear, but barely. Smoke rolled across the ceiling in black waves. "I've got it," Tommy called down. "Then jump. I'll lower you." "I can't." "You can and you will." Adeline wrapped the rope around a post, bracing herself. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. Tommy jumped. The rope went taut in her hands, burning through her palms, even through the fabric of her shawl. She held on with every ounce of strength she possessed, letting the rope slide just enough to slow his descent. Tommy hit the ground hard but whole, rolling to absorb the impact. "Run!" Adeline screamed, shoving him toward the door. They ran. The barn entrance was 20 feet away, then 10, then 5, and then the roof collapsed. The sound was deafening, a crack and roar like the world ending. Burning beams crashed down behind them, and the heat blast threw Adeline forward. She felt rather than saw Tommy stumble, heard his cry of pain as something struck him. Then hands were grabbing her, dragging her the last few feet into clear air. Cole's face swam into focus above her, white with fear and rage and relief. "What the hell were you thinking?" "Tommy," she gasped, her throat raw. "Get Tommy!" "I've got him!" Grant's voice from somewhere to her left. "He's hurt but alive." Adeline tried to sit up, but the world spun violently. Cole held her down, his hands running over her arms, her face, checking for injuries with frantic precision. "You're burned," he said, his voice cracking. "Your hands, your face." "I'm fine." She pushed against him weakly. "The barn is gone. Let it go." She turned her head and saw he was right. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the stars, the structure collapsing in on itself in a storm of sparks and destruction. 30 years of work reduced to ash in less than an hour. The bucket brigade had given up trying to save it and was now focused on keeping the fire from spreading to the other buildings. Men ran back and forth, throwing water on the bunkhouse roof, the storage sheds, anything within reach of the flying embers. "We need to move her," Grant said, kneeling beside them. His face was black with soot, his shirt soaked with sweat. "And Tommy, they both need the doctor." "No doctor." Adeline forced herself to sit up despite Cole's protests. "Not until we're sure the fire won't spread." "You ran into a burning building," Cole said, and there was something wild in his eyes now, something beyond fear. "You could have died. You should have died." "But I didn't." She grabbed his hand, squeezing hard despite the pain in her burned palms. "And neither did Tommy. That's what matters." A crash made them all turn. The last wall of the barn had given way, sending up a column of sparks that looked like 1,000 angry fireflies. The men jumped back, but the danger of spread seemed to have passed. The other buildings were wet enough, far enough away. The barn would burn itself out. Cole pulled Adeline to her feet, supporting most of her weight. "Grant, organize watches. I want men posted all night in case those bastards come back. And send someone to town for the doctor at first light." "Already done, boss." Grant gestured to where Tommy lay on the ground, surrounded by concerned hands. The boy was conscious, holding his arm at an odd angle. Broken, probably, but alive. Because Adeline had run into a burning building to save him. Cole half carried her to his house, not her cabin, his house, and set her in a chair in his kitchen. His hand shook as he pumped water into a basin, as he gathered clean cloths as he knelt before her to examine her injuries. "This is going to hurt," he said quietly. "I know." He cleaned the burns on her hands with a gentleness that made her throat tight. They weren't as bad as they could have been. The shawl had protected her from the worst of it, but they'd blister and scar. Her face had a burn across one cheek where an ember had struck her, and her hair smelled of smoke. "You're lucky," Cole said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Incredibly, impossibly lucky." "I know that too." "Do you?" He looked up at her, and there were tears on his face now, cutting through the soot. "Do you understand what it would have done to me if you'd died in there? If I'd had to watch you burn because you were too brave for your own good?" Adeline cupped his face with her bandaged hands. "I'm sorry I scared you." "Scared doesn't begin to cover it." He pressed his forehead to her knee, his shoulders shaking. "When I saw you run in there, when I realized what you were doing, I've never been so terrified in my entire life." "Would you have done differently? If it was me in that loft instead of Tommy, would you have stood outside and let me die?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "No." "Then you understand why I did it." Cole raised his head, and the look in his eyes was so intense it took her breath away. "I love you," he said fiercely. "I love you so much it terrifies me, and I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll stay alive." "That you'll fight to survive, whatever comes. Because I can lose the barn, I can lose the ranch. I can lose everything I own, but I cannot lose you." The words hung between them, huge and raw and honest. "I promise," Adeline whispered, "on one condition." "Anything." "You promise me the same thing." Cole pulled her down into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe, and they stayed like that while outside the barn, burned and men worked to save what could be saved. Dawn came gray and smoke-hazed. Adeline had dozed fitfully in Cole's chair, wrapped in a blanket, while he kept watch by the window. The doctor arrived with the sun, a different man than Henderson, younger, with kind eyes and steady hands. He examined Tommy first, setting the boy's broken arm with practiced efficiency and declaring him lucky to have escaped with only that. Then he turned his attention to Adeline's burns, clicking his tongue at the damage. "Could have been much worse," he said, applying a salve that smelled of herbs and stung like fury. "Keep them clean, change the dressing twice daily, and for heaven's sake, don't use your hands for anything but the lightest work for at least a week." "That's impossible," Adeline said. "I have to cook. You have to heal. Let someone else cook." The doctor's eyes were stern. "You've got first and second-degree burns here. If they get infected, you could lose use of your hands entirely. Is that worth a few meals?" Cole's hand landed on her shoulder. "She'll rest. I'll make sure of it." After the doctor left, Adeline stood on the porch and surveyed the damage in full daylight. Where the barn had stood was now just a smoking ruin, black timbers jutting up like broken teeth, ash still glowing red in places. The smell of burned wood hung heavy in the air. Grant approached, his face grim. "Found where it started. Eastern wall, low to the ground. Definitely arson. There's kerosene splashed all around." "Anyone see who did it?" Cole asked. "No, but we found something else." Grant held up a scrap of cloth. Expensive fabric, dark blue, with an embroidered edge. "This was snagged on the fence near where they must have approached. Doesn't match anything our boys wear." Adeline felt her jaw tighten. The fabric was distinctive, the kind of thing a wealthy man might wear, the kind of thing Langford's men might wear. "Not proof," Cole said, reading her expression. "Not in any court that matters." "But we know." Grant's voice was hard. "Question is, what are we going to do about it?" Before Cole could answer, the sound of approaching horses made them all turn. Adeline's first thought was that Langford's men were coming back to finish the job, but these riders were familiar. Patterson, Mrs. Chen, the young homesteading couple, and at least a dozen others from the gathering. They dismounted in the yard, taking in the devastation with expressions of shock and anger. "We saw the smoke from miles away," Patterson said. "Came as fast as we could." "It's over," Cole said. "We saved everything but the barn. And we'll help you rebuild it." Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her small frame radiating determination. "Just like you helped us when our places were attacked. That's what neighbors do." One by one, the others voiced agreement. They'd brought tools, lumber, whatever they could spare. By mid-morning, men were clearing the rubble, planning the new structure, turning destruction into the beginning of reconstruction. Adeline watched from the porch, her bandaged hands resting in her lap, and felt something fierce and bright bloom in her chest. This was what Langford hadn't understood, could never understand. You couldn't break people who refused to stay broken. You couldn't divide a community that chose to stand together. But her moment of hope was short-lived. A rider appeared on the western road, not one of theirs, not one of the neighbors. This man wore a badge, and his expression was all business. "I'm looking for Cole Mercer," he announced. Cole stepped forward. "That's me." "I'm Deputy Marshal Thornton, out of Cheyenne. I have a warrant for your arrest." The words fell like stones into water, sending ripples of shock through the gathered crowd. "On what charge?" Grant demanded. Thornton pulled out a folded document. "Illegal land use, water rights violations, and destruction of property. Seems you've been operating outside the bounds of your original land grant, using water that doesn't belong to you, and there's evidence you were involved in burning down a neighbor's barn last month." "That's insane," Cole said, but his voice was calm. "I've done none of those things." "Well, that's for a judge to decide. I'm just here to bring you in." Thornton's hand rested on his gun, not threatening but ready. "You can come peaceful, or we can do this the hard way." Adeline felt the world tilt. This was Langford's real attack, not fire, not intimidation, but the law itself twisted into a weapon. He'd arranged this, bought this, engineered it perfectly. If Cole was arrested, who would run the ranch? Who would organize the resistance? "I'll go," Cole said quietly. "But I need to make arrangements first." "No arrangements. You come now." "Deputy?" Adeline stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Mr. Mercer is the owner of this ranch. He employs 20 men and manages assets worth thousands of dollars. Surely you can give him 1 hour to ensure his business is properly handled before you take him away." Thornton studied her, his eyes flicking to her bandaged hands, her burned face. "You're the cook everyone's been talking about." "I am." "Word is you're the reason all this trouble started. Woman living among men, corrupting good Christian values." The accusation was so absurd that Adeline almost laughed. "Word is wrong. I'm a widow trying to survive, same as half the people in this territory. Now will you grant Mr. Mercer an hour to settle his affairs? Or do I need to send someone to Cheyenne to file a complaint about a deputy who prevented a man from properly managing his business before an arrest?" Thornton's jaw tightened. 1 hour, not a minute more." Cole pulled Grant aside, speaking in low, urgent tones. Adeline watched, her mind racing. An hour wasn't enough time to prove Cole's innocence or expose Langford's manipulation, but it might be enough time to ensure the ranch didn't fall apart in his absence. "Grant's in charge while I'm gone," Cole announced to the gathered men. "You follow his orders like they're mine. Keep working on the barn, keep the herd safe, and for the love of heaven, don't do anything that gives Langford more ammunition." He turned to Adeline, taking her carefully by the shoulders. "I need you to promise me something else now." "What?" "Don't try to fix this. Don't go to Langford. Don't try to negotiate. Don't do anything dangerous." His eyes were desperate. "I know you want to help, but the best thing you can do is stay safe and keep this ranch running." "Cole, promise me, Adeline." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she couldn't just stand by while he was arrested for crimes he didn't commit, but the fear in his eyes stopped her. "I promise," she lied. He kissed her then, in front of everyone, the marshal, the men, the neighbors, acclaiming, a declaration, a promise of his own. "I'll be back," he said against her lips. "Hold on until I am." Then he was mounting his horse, and Thornton was leading him away, and Adeline was standing in the ruined yard watching the man she loved disappear down the road toward an uncertain fate. The silence that followed his departure was crushing. "All right," Grant said finally, his voice rough. "Boss gave us orders. Let's get to work." The men dispersed, but Adeline could see the doubt in their eyes, the fear. Without Cole, would they survive? Could they? She returned to the kitchen despite the doctor's orders, ignoring the pain in her hands as she started preparing lunch. The familiar routine grounded her, gave her something to focus on besides the terrible certainty growing in her mind. Langford had won. He'd destroyed their barn, arrested their leader, and fractured their hope with surgical precision. And unless someone did something drastic, he would keep winning until there was nothing left to take. Mrs. Chen found her there an hour later, working despite the blood seeping through her bandages. "You're hurting yourself," the older woman said gently. "I need to work." "What you need is to rest." Mrs. Chen took the knife from Adeline's hand and guided her to a chair. "Let me ask you something, dear. What were you before you came here?" "A widow. A seamstress. A charity case." "No, I mean, who were you inside?" Mrs. Chen's dark eyes were knowing. "Because the woman I see now, the one who ran into a burning barn, who stood up to Langford in front of the whole town, who Cole Mercer loves enough to kiss in public, that woman didn't just appear from nowhere." Adeline felt tears burn behind her eyes. "I don't know who I was. I was Thomas's wife, and then I was nothing." "You were never nothing." Mrs. Chen squeezed her hand carefully. "You were just waiting for the right place to become yourself. And now you have. Now you're the woman who saves boys from fires and ranchers from their own loneliness. So let me ask you again. Who are you?" The question hung in the air, massive and terrifying. Who was she? Not Thomas's wife. Not the desperate widow who'd arrived in Red Hollow with nothing but a carpetbag and fear. She was the woman who'd learned to cook for 20 men and make them feel like family. Who'd faced down a terrified horse to save a life. Who'd stood in front of an entire town and refused to be shamed. Who'd run into fire because a boy needed saving. She was Adeline Carter, and she was done letting other people write her story. "I'm the woman who's going to fix this," she said quietly. Mrs. Chen smiled. "That's what I thought. Now, what do you need?" "A horse and someone who knows where Langford lives." "Absolutely not." Grant appeared in the doorway, his face set in stubborn lines. "Boss said no heroics, and I'm not letting you ride out to confront a man who just burned down our barn." "Grant, no, I gave Cole my word I'd keep you safe. That means keeping you here." Adeline stood, ignoring the protests from her burned hands. "Cole is sitting in a jail cell right now because of me, because Langford targeted him through me. I won't let that stand."
"Going to Langford won't help. It'll just give him another victim." "Then I won't go alone." Adeline looked at Mrs. Chen, at the other neighbors who'd gathered in the kitchen doorway. "But I am going, with or without your permission." Grant stared at her for a long moment. Then he sighed, the fight draining out of him. "You're as stubborn as the boss. Fine. But I'm coming with you, and we're bringing half the men." "No." Adeline shook her head. "Too many people looks like an attack. This needs to be diplomatic." "Diplomatic," Grant laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You really think you can out-talk a man like Langford?" "No, but I think I can show him that some things can't be bought or burned or broken." She met his eyes. "Trust me, please." In the end, it was Mrs. Chen and Patterson who rode with her. 3 people, 2 who'd lost nearly everything to Langford's attacks, and 1 who refused to lose anything more. They rode east as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the valley. Adeline's hands screamed protest with every movement, but she gripped the reins and pushed forward. Langford's estate appeared like a wound on the landscape, too grand, too polished, utterly out of place in this rough country. A mansion built with Eastern money and Western exploitation, surrounded by fences that marked territory he'd stolen rather than earned. Guards met them at the gate. "State your business," one demanded. "Tell Mr. Langford that Mrs. Carter is here to discuss terms," Adeline said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The guard's eyebrows rose. "Terms?" "He'll understand." After a tense wait, they were escorted to a study that reeked of wealth. Leather chairs, expensive whiskey, books bought for show rather than reading. Langford sat behind a massive desk, his expression one of amused curiosity. Mrs. Carter. How unexpected. His eyes flicked to her bandaged hands. "I heard about the fire. Tragic." "We both know you started it." "Do we? I was nowhere near Mercer Ridge last night. I have witnesses." "Of course you do. Just like you have witnesses to every other attack, every other crime." Adeline stepped closer to his desk. "But we're not here to discuss evidence. We're here to make a deal." Langford leaned back, steepling his fingers. "I'm listening." "You drop the charges against Cole Mercer. You stop the attacks on our neighbors. You leave the water rights alone. And in return?" This was it. The moment that would either save them or destroy everything. "In return," Adeline said, "I leave. I pack my things. I go back to St. Louis or somewhere else far away, and I never come back." The silence that followed was absolute. "No," Patterson said behind her. "Adeline, you can't—" "It's what he wants, isn't it?" She kept her eyes on Langford. "You said it yourself at the town meeting. I'm the problem, the corruption, the woman who's turned Cole against sound business sense. So I'll remove myself from the equation." Langford studied her, his expression calculating. "You'd sacrifice yourself? Your future? For what? A ranch that will fail anyway? A man who can't protect you? For a community that stood by me when I had nothing? For people who deserve better than to be crushed under your greed?" Adeline's voice didn't waver. "And for a man who's worth 10 of you on your best day?" For the first time, something like respect flickered across Langford's face. "You're remarkable, Mrs. Carter. Truly. Mercer is a lucky man." "Then you accept my terms?" "Oh, I accept them, but not quite in the way you think." Langford stood, moving to the window. "See, your offer tells me something important. It tells me that you're the heart of their resistance, that without you, they'll crumble. So why would I let you make this noble sacrifice when I can use you to destroy them more thoroughly?"
Ice flooded Adeline's veins. "Here's my counteroffer," Langford continued. "You do leave, immediately, without saying goodbye, without explanation. Just disappear. And in return, I'll drop the charges against Mercer. But if you ever come back, if he ever comes looking for you, if there's any contact between you whatsoever, I'll destroy him. I'll destroy the ranch. I'll destroy everyone who stood with you." He turned to face her. "Do we have a deal?" Adeline felt the trap close around her. If she agreed, she lost everything: Cole, the ranch, the life she'd built. If she refused, Cole stayed in jail, the attacks would continue, and people would suffer. Either way, Langford won. "You're a monster," she said quietly. "I'm a businessman. There's little difference." Langford smiled. "You have until dawn to decide. After that, Mercer gets transferred to Cheyenne to await trial. And we both know he won't survive that long in custody. Accidents happen, especially to men who've made powerful enemies. The threat was clear. Agree? Or Cole dies." Adeline turned and walked out, her mind reeling. Behind her, she could hear Langford's laughter, the sound of victory. Outside, Patterson and Mrs. Chen were waiting, their faces stricken. "We heard everything," Mrs. Chen said. "That bastard—" "We fight him," Patterson said fiercely. "We don't give in to this." But Adeline barely heard them. She was remembering Cole's words. "I can lose the barn. I can lose the ranch. I can lose everything I own. But I cannot lose you." And her response? "Promise me you'll stay alive." She'd promised to survive. He'd promised to come back. Neither of them had promised to sacrifice the other. As they rode back to Mercer Ridge under a darkening sky, Adeline felt the weight of an impossible choice pressing down on her shoulders. By dawn, she would have to decide. Her happiness or his life. Her future or his survival. There was no right answer. There was only the choice and the consequences, and the terrible price of love in a world that rewarded cruelty more than courage. The ride back to Mercer Ridge felt like traveling through a nightmare where every hoofbeat brought her closer to an unbearable decision. The sun had set completely by the time they arrived, leaving the ranch bathed in moonlight and the ghostly glow of lanterns scattered across the yard. Men were still working on clearing the barn ruins, their movements mechanical, their voices subdued. Grant met them at the gate, his face tight with worry. "Well?" "He wants me gone," Adeline said, dismounting with careful movements that sent fresh agony through her burned hands. "Permanently. In exchange for Cole's freedom." "That son of a—" Grant's curse was vicious and creative. "We're not doing it. We'll find another way." "What other way?" Adeline's voice cracked. "He has the law on his side, Grant. He has money, influence, and men willing to kill on his orders. What do we have?" "Each other." Mrs. Chen had dismounted as well, her small frame radiating fury. "We have each other, and that's more than he'll ever have." "It's not enough." Adeline felt the words tear out of her like confession. "Not against this. Not when Cole's life is the price of my stubbornness." She walked toward her cabin before anyone could argue, before the tears burning behind her eyes could fall in front of witnesses. Inside, she lit a single lamp and sank onto her bed, staring at the few possessions she'd accumulated in her months here. The cabin that had felt like home now felt like a cage. A knock came at her door. "I don't want company," she called out. The door opened anyway. Grant stepped inside, followed by Mrs. Chen, Patterson, and 3 other neighbors who'd stayed to help with the barn. They crowded into the small space, their faces set with determination. "We're not letting you do this alone," Grant said. "You don't have a choice. This is my decision." "The hell it is." Patterson moved closer, his weathered face creased with anger. "You think Cole would want you sacrificing yourself for him? You think any of us would?" "What I think," Adeline said slowly, "is that if I don't make this choice, he dies. Langford made that very clear. Accidents happen to men in custody. So tell me, what's the alternative? Watch Cole hang for crimes he didn't commit? Let Langford destroy everyone who stood with us?" "We fight," Mrs. Chen said simply. "We expose him for what he is." "How? With what proof? That scrap of fabric Grant found could have come from anywhere. Every attack has been untraceable. Langford's too smart to leave evidence." Adeline's voice rose despite herself.
Don't you understand? He's already won. The only question is how much more he gets to destroy before we admit it. The silence that followed was crushing. Then a new voice spoke from the doorway. Maybe not the only question. Danny stood there, leaning heavily on a crutch, his broken arm in a sling.
Behind him were more ranch hands, and behind them, more neighbors. The cabin was too small for them all, so they spilled out onto the porch, into the yard, a growing crowd of people who'd heard what happened and come anyway. "What are you doing out of bed?" Adeline demanded, but her throat was tight. "Couldn't sleep knowing you were planning to give up." Danny hobbled closer. "Ma'am, you saved my life. Ran into a burning barn when you didn't have to, when it would have been smarter to let me die. You think I'm going to stand by while you throw yourself away for us?" "This is different. It ain't different at all." The young man's voice was fierce. "You taught us something, Mrs. Carter. You and the boss both. You taught us that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are impossible. You taught us that standing together means something." "He's right," one of the other hands said. "You don't give up on family, and that's what we are now, family." Adeline looked around at their faces, these rough men who'd become her brothers, these neighbors who'd become her community, these people who'd taken a desperate widow and given her a home. The weight of their faith in her was almost too much to bear. "I can't let Cole die," she whispered. "Then we make sure he doesn't," Grant said, "but not by surrendering, by winning." "How?" The question was a plea. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her eyes sharp with calculation. "Langford's strength is his money and his connections, but those are also his weakness. Rich men like him think everyone has a price. They don't understand people who won't be bought." "So we find someone he can't buy," Patterson said slowly, understanding dawning. "Someone who outranks him." "The territorial governor?" Adeline shook her head. "Langford already has his ear. That's how he got the warrant issued." "Not the governor. The marshal's office in Cheyenne." Grant's face lit up with grim satisfaction. "The real one. Langford bought Deputy Marshal Thornton. That much is obvious from how quickly he moved. But the U.S. Marshal for Wyoming Territory? That's a different story. That's a man appointed by the federal government, not the territorial one. A man who answers to Washington, not local politics." "And you think he'll listen to us?" Adeline wanted to hope, but couldn't quite manage it. "I think he'll listen to evidence." Grant pulled out the scrap of expensive fabric they'd found. "This alone isn't enough. But combined with testimony from everyone who's been attacked, with documentation of the timing and pattern, with proof that Langford's been using the law as a weapon, that might be enough to at least get an investigation started." "We'd need to get to Cheyenne, but," Patterson said, "that's a 2-day ride." "And we'd need to leave now," Mrs. Chen added, "before dawn, before Langford expects any move from us." As Adeline felt something shift in her chest, that dangerous thing called hope. Even if it works, even if we convince the marshal to investigate, that takes time. Time Cole doesn't have. Then we buy him time. Grant's smile was sharp as a knife. "We send one group to Cheyenne with the evidence, and another group stages a different kind of fight." "What kind of fight?" "The kind that makes Langford show his hand, the kind that forces him to act in public, where witnesses can see." Grant looked around at the assembled crowd. "He thinks we're broken. Let's show him exactly how wrong he is." The plan came together over the next hour, pieces falling into place with a rightness that felt almost predestined. Mrs. Chen and Patterson would ride to Cheyenne with documentation of every attack, every intimidation tactic, every suspicious land purchase Langford had made. They'd take the fabric, sworn testimonies, and a letter from Adeline detailing everything that had happened. Meanwhile, the rest of them would do something Langford wouldn't expect. They'd rebuild the barn. Not next week, not next month. Tomorrow. In broad daylight, with every rancher in the valley working together, they'd raise a new structure on the ashes of the old one. A statement that couldn't be ignored. A defiance that couldn't be burned away. "He'll attack again," one of the hands said quietly. "We're counting on it," Grant replied. "But this time, we'll be ready. This time, there'll be witnesses from every ranch in the territory watching. This time, when he shows his true face, everyone will see it." It was risky. It was possibly suicidal. It was exactly the kind of desperate gamble that could either save them or destroy them completely. Adeline looked around at the faces surrounding her, weathered and determined, scared but standing firm. These people who'd taken her in when she had nothing. These people who'd become her family when she'd lost everything else. "All right," she said. "We fight." The crowd erupted in fierce agreement, voices overlapping as they divided tasks and responsibilities. Mrs. Chen and Patterson left within the hour, riding hard for Cheyenne with saddlebags full of evidence and hope. The rest scattered to spread the word, to gather supplies, to prepare for the battle ahead. Grant lingered after the others had gone. "You know this could go very wrong." "I know." "If it does, if Langford wins anyway, then at least we went down fighting instead of surrendering." Adeline managed a tired smile. "That has to count for something." "It counts for everything." Grant squeezed her shoulder carefully, mindful of her injuries. "Boss is lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have him, to have all of you." She paused. "Grant, if this doesn't work, if something happens to me, tell Cole I kept my promise. I stayed alive as long as I could. And tell him it was worth it." "You'll tell him yourself," Grant said firmly. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be hell." But rest wouldn't come. Adeline lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the ranch preparing for war, and thought about everything that had led to this moment. Thomas's death, the desperate flight west, that first day in Red Hollow, dusty and afraid and trying so hard to be brave. Cole's hand offering help without judgment, the kitchen that had become her domain, the men who'd become her family, the barn burning, and the choice to run toward danger instead of away from it. All of it had been leading here, to this impossible gamble, to this moment where everything hung in the balance. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to pre-dawn gray and the sound of wagons rolling into the yard. Through her window she could see families arriving, ranchers from every corner of the valley. Some she recognized from the gathering, others she'd never met. They came with lumber and tools, with determination etched into every line of their weathered faces. Adeline dressed quickly and headed to the kitchen. If they were going to build a barn in a day, they'd need fuel. She worked through the pain in her hands, mixing dough for what felt like 1,000 biscuits, setting enormous pots of beans to simmer, preparing food for an army. By the time the sun rose, the yard was full of people. More than 50 men and women working together to measure and cut, to dig post holes, to begin the framework that would become a new barn. Children ran between their legs, carrying water and tools, their voices bright with excitement at being part of something important. Adeline served breakfast in shifts, watching through the kitchen window as the structure began to take shape. It was going fast, faster than should have been possible, because everyone worked with a unified purpose. This wasn't just about one barn on one ranch. This was about refusing to be broken, about community as resistance. By mid-morning, riders appeared on the eastern ridge. "Grant!" one of the men called out. "We've got company!" The work stopped. Tools lowered. Everyone turned to watch as 6 horsemen descended toward the ranch, Langford himself at their head. He'd come personally this time, unable to resist seeing his victory firsthand. But when he reached the yard and saw what they were doing, saw the barn half raised, saw the crowd of witnesses, saw Adeline standing on the porch with her bandaged hands and unbowed head, his expression shifted from confidence to rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, dismounting with barely controlled fury. "Rebuilding," Grant said calmly. "What does it look like?" "It looks like a waste of time and lumber. I told Mrs. Carter my terms. She has until dawn to accept them." "Dawn's passed," Adeline called out, "and I'm rejecting your terms." Langford's face went purple. "Then Mercer hangs. His blood will be on your hands." "No, his blood will be on yours, along with everyone else you've hurt." Adeline descended the steps, moving to stand beside Grant. "You wanted to break us, to divide us, to prove that money and power always win, but you were wrong." She gestured to the crowd surrounding them, ranchers and cowboys, widows and families, people who had every reason to run but chose to stand instead. "This is what you don't understand, Langford. You can burn our buildings, you can buy corrupt deputies, you can threaten and intimidate and manipulate the law, but you can't break people who refuse to stay broken. You can't divide a community that chooses unity. And you can't win against people who have nothing left to lose. Pretty speech, Langford sneered, but it changes nothing. By nightfall, Mercer will be transferred to Cheyenne, and we both know he won't survive the journey. Is that a threat? A new voice asked. Everyone turned. A man sat on horseback at the edge of the yard, tall, weathered, wearing a badge that caught the morning sun. Not Deputy Marshal Thornton. Someone else. Someone whose authority radiated like heat. U.S. Marshal William Garrett, the man said, dismounting. Behind him rode Mrs. Chen and Patterson, looking exhausted but triumphant. I believe we need to have a conversation, Mr. Langford. The color drained from Langford's face. I don't know what these people have told you, but they've told me plenty. And I've spent the last 6 hours reviewing evidence of systematic harassment, arson, illegal intimidation, and corruption of territorial law enforcement. Garrett's voice was cold as winter iron. Would you like to explain why Deputy Marshal Thornton arrested Cole Mercer on what appear to be completely fabricated charges? Those charges are legitimate. They're lies bought and paid for by you. Thornton's already confessed. Seems he's more interested in saving his own skin than protecting yours. Garrett pulled out a document. I'm here to release Cole Mercer immediately and to inform you that you're under investigation by the federal government for multiple violations of territorial law. Langford's hands clenched into fists. You can't prove anything. Can I? I've got testimony from 15 families you've attacked. I've got evidence of arson. I've got a deputy marshal willing to detail exactly how much you paid him to abuse his authority. Garrett smiled without humor. And I've got this. He held up the scrap of expensive fabric. Found at the scene of last night's fire. Matches a coat belonging to one of your men, a man who's currently sitting in my custody and singing like a canary to avoid hanging for arson and attempted murder. The world seemed to stop. Adeline felt tears spring to her eyes, felt her knees go weak with relief so intense it was almost painful. They'd won. Against impossible odds, against money and power and corruption, they'd actually won. Langford looked around at the crowd, at the half-built barn, at Adeline standing tall despite her injuries. For the first time, genuine fear crossed his features. This isn't over, he said, but his voice had lost its conviction. Yes, Marshal Garrett said quietly. It is. You're coming with me to Cheyenne to answer some very serious questions. And if I were you, I'd be thinking about hiring a very good lawyer. Langford's men shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing their employer's protection had evaporated. One by one, they backed away, hands raised to show they wanted no part of whatever happened next. Take him, Garrett said to his deputies. Real federal deputies, not bought local ones. They moved forward with handcuffs, and Langford didn't resist. He looked diminished somehow, smaller, a bully finally facing consequences. As they led him away, Garrett turned to Adeline. Mrs. Carter, I presume? Yes, sir. You've got a hell of a lot of courage. Your testimony is what convinced me this needed immediate attention. He touched his hat brim. Cole Mercer's being released as we speak. Should be back here by sundown. Sundown. Cole would be home by sundown. Adeline felt the words wash over her like absolution. He was safe. They were safe. The nightmare was over. The crowd erupted in celebration, whoops and cheers and backslapping joy. People hugged each other, laughed, cried, gave thanks to whatever forces had brought them through to the other side. Someone started singing, and the song spread through the assembly like wildfire. Grant swept Adeline into a careful embrace, laughing like a madman. We did it. We actually did it. You did it, she corrected. Your plan, our fight, our victory. He set her down gently. Now come on. We've got a barn to finish before the boss gets home. They worked through the afternoon with renewed energy, the celebration becoming fuel for faster progress. By the time the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, the barn's frame stood complete. Not finished, but unmistakably there. A structure raised from ashes, built by community, standing as proof that some things couldn't be burned away. Adeline stood beside the new building, her bandaged hands aching but her heart fuller than she'd ever thought possible. Around her, families packed up tools and prepared to head home, their voices warm with satisfaction and hope. Thank you, she said to each one as they left. Thank you for standing with us. Thank you for reminding us what's worth standing for, Mrs. Chen replied, squeezing her hand carefully. You changed this valley, Adeline. Don't ever forget that. As the last wagon rolled away, Adeline returned to the kitchen to prepare supper. The men would be hungry after their labors, and she still had a job to do. But her mind was on the road, watching for a rider, waiting for the moment that would make everything real. Sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and fire when she heard hoofbeats thundering into the yard. She ran to the window, her heart in her throat. Cole dismounted in a single fluid motion, his eyes scanning the ranch, taking in the half-built barn, the evidence of the day's battle. Then his gaze found the kitchen window, found her, and his entire body sagged with relief. Adeline didn't remember moving. One moment she was at the window, the next she was running across the yard, heedless of her injuries, heedless of the watching ranch hands. She crashed into Cole's arms, and he caught her, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "You're here," she gasped against his chest. "You're really here." "I'm here. I'm safe." His hands were in her hair, on her back, touching her as if to confirm she was real. "I heard what you did. What you all did." "Adeline, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did. Because I love you and I wasn't going to lose you to that monster's games." She pulled back just enough to see his face, to map the new lines of exhaustion and fear and relief. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "I'm fine. Better than fine now that I'm home." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "When I heard you'd gone to Langford alone, when I thought you might have—" His voice broke. "Don't ever scare me like that again. I promised I'd stay alive. I kept my promise. You did more than that. You saved us all." He kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of every emotion they'd been holding back. The ranch hands whooped and cheered, but Adeline barely heard them over the pounding of her own heart. When they finally broke apart, Cole kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "Marry me," he said. Adeline's breath caught. "What?" "Marry me. I know it's fast. I know there's 100 reasons to wait, but I don't want to wait. I've wasted too much time being alone, being afraid to hope for something good." He pulled back to look at her properly. "I love you, Adeline Carter. I love your courage and your kindness and your absolutely terrifying tendency to run into burning buildings. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to face anything alone again." Tears spilled freely down Adeline's cheeks. 6 months ago, she'd been a widow with nothing, riding into a hostile town with fear and desperation as her only companions. Now she stood in the arms of a man who loved her, surrounded by a community that had become her family, offered a future she'd never dared to imagine. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Cole's answering smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He kissed her again, and this time the cheers from the ranch hands were deafening. Grant was laughing, Tommy was crying happy tears despite his tough guy posture, and even the horses seemed to sense the joy in the air. The wedding happened 3 weeks later, on a brilliant October morning when the aspens were gold and the sky was impossibly blue. The entire valley came, every family that had stood with them, every person who'd helped raise the barn, all the neighbors who'd learned what community really meant. The ceremony took place in front of the new barn, not quite finished but standing proud nevertheless. Adeline wore a dress Mrs. Chen and the other women had sewn for her, pale blue like the Wyoming sky, simple but beautiful. Her hands were still bandaged, the burns healing but not yet healed, but she didn't care. When Cole took them in his own scarred hands and spoke his vows, nothing else mattered. "I promise to stand beside you in every fight," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp air. "To honor your courage, to shelter your heart, and to build a life with you that's worth all the struggle it took to find each other." Adeline's own vows came from somewhere deep and true. "I promise to choose you every day, in every way. To be your partner in building something that lasts, something that can't be burned or broken or bought. To love you with everything I am, for as long as I live." They sealed their promises with a kiss that tasted like hope and hard-won joy, and the valley erupted in celebration. There was music and dancing, food enough to feed a small army, laughter that chased away the last shadows of fear. As evening fell and lanterns were lit across the ranch, Adeline stood on the porch of the main house, her house now, hers and Cole's together, and watched the celebration continue. Grant was teaching Danny to dance despite his still healing arm. Mrs. Chen was telling stories that had the young ranch hands blushing. Patterson and his wife were swaying to the music, looking at each other like teenagers instead of weathered ranchers. Cole came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Happy? Happier than I ever thought possible. She leaned back against his chest. Is this real? Sometimes I still can't believe it. It's real. Hard-won and real. He pressed a kiss to her temple. We built this, Adeline. You and me, and everyone here. We built something that's going to last. She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd taken a chance on a desperate widow and found his own salvation in the process. What happens now? Now? Cole smiled. Now we live. We work this ranch, we raise that barn, we take care of our people. We have arguments and make up and grow old together. We build a future worth all the fight it took to get here. Sounds perfect. It won't always be easy. There'll be hard winters and tough years and new challenges. But we'll face them together. Adeline reached up to touch his face, marveling at the right to do so freely. That's the difference. We're not alone anymore. Never alone again, Cole agreed. The music swelled, calling them back to the celebration, but they stayed on the porch a moment longer. Below them, the valley stretched out in moonlit beauty. Their valley now, their home, their hard-won paradise. The barn stood half complete, a testament to community and resilience. The ranch hummed with life and laughter and the promise of tomorrow. And Adeline Mercer now, felt something she'd thought lost forever when Thomas died and her world collapsed. She felt home. Not in a place, though this land had claimed her heart. Not in a building, though these walls sheltered her, but in the choice to fight for what mattered, in the community that stood together, in the love of a man who saw her strength and matched it with his own. She'd arrived in Red Hollow with nothing but a carpetbag and stubborn dignity, a widow fleeing from loss and shame. She'd taken a job as a cook because it was the only option that didn't feel like giving up entirely. She'd faced down gossip and danger and a man who thought money could break anything. And she'd won, not because she was stronger or smarter or luckier than anyone else, but because she'd chosen to stand when running would have been easier, because she'd found people worth fighting for and fought with everything she had. The story that had begun with a newspaper clipping and a desperate gamble had become something bigger than survival. It had become a life built from courage and community, from love earned in fire and struggle, from the simple radical act of refusing to be broken. Come on, Cole said, taking her hand. Our guests are waiting. They descended the porch steps together, stepping into the light and music and joy of their celebration. And as Adeline danced with her husband under a sky full of stars, surrounded by the family she'd found and the home she'd fought for, she thought about the woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach months ago. That frightened widow wouldn't recognize the woman Adeline had become. Wouldn't believe that happiness like this was possible after so much loss. But that was all right. Because the journey from who she'd been to who she was now, that was the real story. Not the arrival or the struggle or even the victory, but the transformation that happened when someone decided their life was worth fighting for and found others willing to fight beside them. The ranch would grow, the barn would be finished. Winter would come and they'd survive it together, and spring would bring new challenges and new triumphs. Children would run through these yards someday, hers and Cole's, she hoped, though she'd learned not to count on such things. The valley would change and grow, shaped by the people who refused to let one man's greed destroy it. But tonight was for celebration, for dancing and laughter, and the pure simple joy of being alive and loved and home. As the music played and the stars wheeled overhead and her husband's arms held her close, Adeline let herself feel the full weight of what they'd accomplished. They'd taken ashes and built something beautiful. They'd taken loss and transformed it into community. They'd taken fear and alchemized it into courage. And in the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The widow from St. Louis who'd arrived in Red Hollow with nothing had found what she'd been searching for all along, not just survival, but a reason to survive. Not just a job, but a purpose. Not just shelter, but a home built on love and sacrifice and the unshakable certainty that some things were worth fighting for no matter the cost. She'd found her place in the world, and she would defend it, nurture it, and celebrate it for all the days to come. That was the real victory. That was the triumph worth every moment of struggle. That was home.